Good evening. This study session of the Board of Education for February 3rd, 2015 is called to order. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone present and to our television viewers. While our study sessions are generally limited to receipt of information from staff and discussion of that information, review of resolutions prior to vote, at times we do conduct votes during study sessions. Any item that will be voted on this evening has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV Services website. Directors Regan and Curler are absent this evening. Director Regan is with a delegation in Washington, D.C. with the Oregon School Boards Association, lobbying for improved federal funding and policy. So go Bobby and Oregon School Boards Association. All right. So this time I think we'll kick off with public comment. Ms. Houston, do we have anyone signed up?
We do. We have a total of 5.
Great.
And our first 2 speakers are Fair Hutchins and Jennifer Starkey.
Okay, so while those folks are coming forward, I'll just read the instructions. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend the meeting tonight and provide your comments to the board. We value your input and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. We're going to actively listen and reflect on your comments, but we're not going to respond to comments or questions during public comment. We have asked Board Manager Roseanne Powell to follow up on issues that are raised, so she's available there if you have questions afterward about how the board or staff might respond. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration for others. Complaints about individual employees should be directed to the superintendent's office. So you have a total of 3 minutes to share your comments. Please begin by stating your name and spelling your last name for the record. During the first 2 minutes, there'll be a green light. When you have 1 minute remaining, the yellow light will come on. And then when the time is up, a red light comes on, and we respectfully ask that you wrap up at that time. So thanks again for taking the time to be here, and you may begin.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Fair Hutchins, Hutchins, and good evening. Appreciate the opportunity to share and join this conversation about our children in our schools. I am a concerned community member. I used to be a social worker with PPS, and I worked for a program called the Attendance Initiative, which was a culturally specific program with SEI, ERCO, and Impact Northwest Slavic. It's been a couple of years since I've worked with the school systems. I was a little discouraged after working with that program, but I am coming back as a volunteer in the Spanish immersion program at Beach, so I'm really excited to come back. So the program I worked for was quickly defunded after about 2 years, even though it did directly address attendance, which is one of PPS's equity research outlined as a central indicator for success. Lou Frederick last week, or a couple weeks ago, he was speaking at the Equity Town Hall at Boise, and he shared that racial equity issues have not changed much since the 80s, and that the issues are actually well understood, but the solutions are not being funded. So I agree with him. I think he's correct. And we do know what the problems are, and we know that PPS's respectable commitment to research has definitely defined what the solutions are, but we're not funding them. Or in my case, we fund a solution temporarily, but not long enough for it to have an impact. So I would like to share tonight 2 ways that I see that institutional racism is active in these failures. I share not as an attack, but as a cry for dialogue. Firstly, the inconsistency of committed resources to equity is to blame for the failure of these programs. The defunding of a solution-based program like mine, before it could get its feet under it, is actually a form of racism. Please hear me out. I know that funding is a very complicated issue. But programs that serve communities of color, they stay in this experimental phase, and then their funding comes and goes. And usually the programs that serve communities of color will be given up before they actually have that chance to thrive, the same way that Black families at my schools were falling through the cracks. When I was working, 2 of my favorite students were a Black kindergartner and 1st grader. It's really sad. Ugh. And the principal told me not to work with them, that I should give up. And that was really frustrating. But I didn't give up. Kept doing that. But what I did see is that the school really, let me see if I can get back on track here, a little emotional. The evidence of the school-to-prison pipeline in this, and just how we don't fund things that actually work, is part of that racism. Trying to watch my yellow light. And then secondly, along with the inconsistent resources for equity, we have failed outcomes because Black and brown people are not invited and pursued to be at the table to develop and fund programs that they need. So I would just really like to encourage all of you to ask for direct community involvement in the budget process here and really get people at the table, because people know what they need. The Black community knows what they need, and we need to be able to ask them and actually get there, engage them.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks.
very much.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Hi. My name is Jennifer Starkey, Starkey. I'm here at the bequest of a parent at the school I teach at after school. I was a staff member at MESD Outdoor School for 4 years between 2007 and 2011, and during that time, the program went through a huge shrinkage. It was all the budgets in the region. They just lost their funding, and so it went. All the districts either had to cut their time in half or just eliminate it completely. I wrote some things down. We were faced with the task of making a 3-day program as effective and meaningful as possible. Something Outdoor School excels at is structure. It is a finely tuned 45-plus-year structure that is highly intentional in every detail. And what happens to 6th graders in that structure is that they have a predictable schedule, a place to sleep, meals to eat, and people around them. And predictability allows students to relax and learn more. Outdoor School also pushes so many students out of their comfort zones and pushes them to grow. The combination of exposure to new people, a new place, new routines, new ways of learning, and even being away from home and being in the outdoors is a big opportunity for growth for so many students. The structure and new experiences are beneficial for students at any length, so I don't want to diminish the 3-day program in any way. However, it isn't just a math issue when it comes to the benefits of increased time at Outdoor School. 3 days to 60 days is not just twice as much field study or twice as many meals or twice as many campfires. It is an exponential result. 6th grade is something I've noticed. It's this magic time where identity really starts to take hold. And I've watched countless students do things on Friday that they never would have done on Sunday when they got off the bus. Homesick kids don't want to leave. The kid that fails in the classroom is outstanding on field study and finds out that they're smart. And the kid who can't make friends at school makes a ton of friends from other schools. And today, so I work now. You may be familiar with the Kaiser on Interstate by Overlook Park. I make coffee there. I've done it for over a year. And today I was talking to some regulars, and I was like, Hillary, did you go to Outdoor School? And she was like, yeah, it was the best week of my life. And I said, why? She said, oh, I had no friends before I went to Outdoor School. And then I went and I met all these people. And then I was like, wow, I can make friends. This woman was like the friendliest person in the whole place. So anyway, go figure. Anyway, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Our next two speakers, Rick Till and Maria De Silva.
You go ahead. I get to hold my sign for 3 minutes more.
Chair Atkins, board members, I'm Rick Till. I'm on the board for East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. If you're not familiar with East Multnomah, we're a special district with a publicly elected board of directors that has a small tax base to spend money on helping people care for their land and water. In addition to that, for the last 3 years, we've been providing support for Outdoor School. 3 years ago, it was on an emergency basis to keep the program from being completely cut. Since then, we've been providing funding just to keep the program maintained as the community works to restore it to a full week. We've also paid for a planning program through the Intertwine Alliance to develop a strategy for restoring the program for a full week. Even with that work, it's a long shot to get that done in the near future. You guys have an opportunity to possibly do that this year. That would make a huge difference for me. I don't have, it's been a struggle to get the money out of the East Multnomah each year. Not everybody's in agreement that we should be contributing the amount we are. Makes my case substantially easier if I'm using that money to leverage a full week versus just the 3 days, and that would make a huge difference. That would give me the basis to even try and get that same level of funding for another 2 or 3 years until some of the bigger strategies can come in and help make that a perpetual program. Also, in addition to helping me get more money to the program, I think providing that stability would also afford us, as any more money comes available to the East Multnomah, to explore ways to enhance the program, provide more opportunities for student leaders. I'd like to see more student leaders placed in internship positions throughout the city and with natural resource groups and nonprofits to learn more and cultivate the next generation of conservation leaders. It's hard to explore those additional opportunities if we're just barely keeping our heads above water for the existing program. So I encourage you to restore the full program for the next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your support of Outdoor School. We really appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Yes. Hi, thank you. It feels very good. The energy today is the first time this beautiful lady, Karen Hutchins, let me sign up without asking me to arrange it ahead of time. So let me introduce you. This is Maya. She goes to regular elementary school, first grade. And Meshi is a special needs child. He's going to be going to PPS, public schools. Hopefully, he'll have a good opportunity. I'm one of the board of directors of the regular PTA, as you know me, and I've been coming here to a lot of your meetings to ask you to demand, to ask you to listen. Lately, I've been coming with Don't Shoot to protest and to shut down your meetings because I don't know what else to do. My kids are here, and you are responsible for their success as well as I am. I've done everything as a parent to provide them as much opportunity, equal access and equal opportunity for them to succeed. Now you have to do your job and you have to do your share. It's very sad for me today. I met with our principal, Sara Garandilla, and with the PTA for a recap leadership meeting. And her goals, they were unrealistic. She has a lot of hope and a lot of good positive energy to meet our goals. 30 to 45% of our students on 3rd, 4th, 5th grade are failing. Actually it's more than that, only 35 to 45%, are underachieved. They are not getting to benchmark. And one of her goals was to bring 50% of our minority kids to reading level on benchmark, which means half of the Latina women that were there in the meeting will get their kids to a benchmark by the end of the year, but half of us, we won't, and that's very sad. I guess the other thing is that you gave us a little bit more for 2 EAs. Let me tell you, we had 5 EAs. We did not have that many. It helped that we protested. Out of those 5 EAs, 4 quit, they're gone. Because you did not help us to fund those student management, Black community liaison, and restorative justice person. In part, I'm not going to say that that's the reason why they fall, but in part, they knew what was coming without them at regular elementary school. So they are gone, and we have 2 new EAs. We're going to have a couple more who have no idea of how to do their job, and hopefully you will bring us help. My job is, I am an EA, and my job is to bring kids to benchmark who are really low to benchmark in 2 months, in 1 month, but with effective, teachers who are supported and listened by their board of directors. To finish, I just want to tell you that it just breaks my heart because every time I come with my kids, they see me crying, and I shouldn't be going through this, but you cannot expect us to bring the kids to benchmark if you are not funding us a librarian, at least a full-time nurse, another teacher, another reading specialist. We have the same budget than last year, except that we have 2 new EAs, and those 2 new EAs, that are working with kindergartners. They're not gonna be working with 3rd, 4th, 5th graders to bring them to benchmark. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our last speaker is James Lopez Erickson.
Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
I just wanted to first share
Can
a
you-
quote.
Excuse me, could you share your name and spell your last name for
Oh,
the
sure.
record? Thanks.
My name is James Lopez Erickson. My last name is spelled, Erickson is Ericksen.
Thanks.
I first wanted to share a quote that someone shared with me today. She's African American, a mother whose children are at this school district. And the reason I wanted to share this quote is because I acknowledge how many parents of color don't or can't make it to meetings like tonight. And she said that the system isn't broken because it's working exactly how it's supposed to for who it's supposed to work for. It isn't for us, people of color. We got to create our own. And something my wife shared, who's Latina, said, first, people of color aren't invited, then we're blamed for not participating. So don't blame me when I decide to do things my own way. And so I acknowledge every family of color who doesn't make it to meetings like tonight and who do not make up the administration of the Portland Public Schools. The first thing I would like to ask for is an immediate proposal and a vote for a change to the 3-minute testimony when a non-English speaking person testifies. I ask that the policy states the timer stops during translation and then continues again when the person continues their testimony. The second thing I would like to do is again acknowledge every parent and student of color who is not here tonight. I've been to so many rallies around immigration, around injustices in regards to racism, and so many families of color don't come. And the thing that my wife says to me at the end of the day is, I can't. And she'll say that even if the security of our children are at stake, because the stressors of her life get to be to a point where she becomes literally debilitated, where her physical ability to do things anymore just comes to an end. And so I'm here tonight as a white person advocating for my wife and every family of color who is not being able to participate in the very system that it wasn't set up to work for. And so there are two stories I'd like to share. One was, and these were both right after Ferguson, at a school where an African-American family attends. Their son is black. He was asked to step outside of the classroom, and while he was asked to step outside of the classroom, the teacher was trying to do, I don't know what she was trying to do, a cultural awareness training or something with her students who are in elementary age, explaining to them that the black kids in her class might be extremely upset because of the verdict that happened in Ferguson. And I think this was a very inappropriate example of how a teacher tried to implement something in regards to racial equity. The second example was a black student who is in elementary age was asked to stand in the middle of the classroom. The teacher then proceeded to ask the students in the classroom, well, what's different about this child? Well, at that age, you're getting responses like their shoelaces, the color of their coat, those types of things, until the teacher insisted that the students acknowledge that the kid's skin color is what's different about them. Both of these examples show the lack of experience and training need for a cultural competency within our teachers.
Thank you very much. You might want to check with our board manager too, because I think she can clarify about one of your points that were already is part of our policy. Thank you very much to everyone who testified tonight. So our contract with the Portland Federation of School Professionals allows time on the board agenda for comments. So I'd like to welcome Belinda Regan, president of PFSP, to come on down and provide some comments at this time. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Belinda Regan. I'm the president of PFSP, the Portland Federation of School Professionals. Before I begin my pre-written dialogue, I do want to stand in support of our mother from Wrigler and her comments about the the need for EAs in the 3rd and 4th grade levels to maintain the progress that we hope to achieve in reading. Really very essential. So good evening to all of you. Several weeks ago, I received the district's budget prioritizing exercise, which I promptly sat down and attended to. And in doing so, I realized with certainty that I really would not wish these decision-making duties on anyone, even you folks. Had I the ability and the point allowances, I would have fully touched each one of the proposed budget items, but I didn't. As background to my plea this evening to you as school board members, I hope that you'll indulge me for a few moments as I explain the reasoning behind my support of one budget focus option in particular. I am a child of Portland, having attended the first kindergarten class ever enrolled at Joseph Meek Elementary in the mid-50s. In 1959, I left Meek when my family moved across town, and I became a part of a small school district called the Sylvan School District, which soon merged into Portland Public Schools, providing 2 new West Side schools, Little Sylvan and West Sylvan. West Sylvan, of course, became a feeder for Lincoln High School, which was my alma mater. As I grew up in Portland schools, I spent my fair share of time in the school office. I'm certain an explanation of the why isn't necessary for those of you who know me well. As an office regular, I grew to adore the secretaries with whom I visited regularly, women whose warmth and compassion was felt by all students, parents, and staff. They were always busy, but never too much so to take a few minutes to chat and act truly interested in my probably boring life. Never do I recall there being just one secretary in my school. There were always 2 or 3, answering phones, attending to student and family needs, working with the principal, and so much more that I simply wasn't aware of. Today in Portland, our schools serve an incredibly different student and family population than was present in the days that I attended school. As Portland has grown, we've welcomed a wonderfully diverse community, enriching our student bodies with special needs kids, children from other cultures, and from varying socioeconomic backgrounds. We've also experienced a tremendous change in how we manage our schools as classroom sizes have increased, technology has burst forth into our lives, and students face new challenges each year, both educationally and socially. Throughout all of these enormous changes, the school office continues to remain the hub of every building in this district. In the past 25 years since Measure 5 was foolishly passed, we've been forced to stand by and watch the demands and responsibilities of the office staff increase 20-fold, while our secretarial numbers continue to shrink in an effort to maintain a balanced budget. The school that once housed 3 secretaries serving in different capacities now has an office managed by just one person, stretched to their limit, and yet the duties continue to pile on these hard-working, dedicated employees. Seldom do secretaries take breaks. Too often when I walk into a school office, I see the sole secretary eating a sandwich at their desk as they type, answer phones, and tend to sick children. More often than the district will acknowledge, secretaries work beyond their 8-hour shift without pay, simply in order to finish their tasks, only to return the next day to feel overwhelmed all over again. Happily, for the first time in years, some schools received part-time funding for additional clerical workers this year. While this added FTE helped tremendously in many cases, it affected far too few of our schools. Excuse me, and our secretaries continue to be overworked, overloaded, and overwhelmed with their everyday jobs. Add to that the constant changes to district software programs, practices, and policies, and the transference of duties once handled by district-based departments. the women and men who are truly the backbone of every school can hardly function any longer. We are losing increasing numbers of secretaries each year as they reach their highest level of tolerance to the ever-mounting duties assigned to them. My message to you tonight is this. A happy school requires a happy secretary, one who is able to complete their assignments while answering those phones and attending to those sick children, dealing with angry parents, and sometimes demanding staff, all within the 8-hour day that they're actually paid for. I do not believe that this goal can be achieved without the addition of at least one full-time secretary to every school in this district. As you ponder how best to fund our educational processes in the years ahead, please keep this in mind. Portland Public Schools simply cannot provide an excellent education to every child in Portland without the warmth and compassion that I experienced as a child from the secretaries who keep these systems fine-tuned. While I am certain that warmth and compassion remain a priority for all of our wonderful school office workers, I'm left wondering how they can continue to face each new day with a smile for the students, the parents, and the staff when they are so incredibly beleaguered by their ever-increasing workloads. Please consider an increase of clerical workers to our schools as you make your difficult budget decisions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Regan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for letting me have a moment.
Thank you. All right, so now, Student Representative J.S. Wiley, you have a report to share with us.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to start by congratulating all the teams who participated in last month's We the People competitions. Having been part of this program, I know the tremendous work that goes into preparation and immense knowledge to gain. I'd like to recognize Madison High School, which this was their first year having a Constitution team, who won a unit award at the district competition, which means that they had the highest score for a single unit of all the teams there, which is just really awesome considering it's their first year, and I'm excited to see where they go. And then I have very high hopes. I have very high hopes for Grant, who's continuing to the national competition in late April. Secondly, I'd like to highlight the importance of having learning opportunities outside the classroom. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity with my IB biology class to go watch a body get dissected. And getting to see the human anatomy inches away from where I stood was just an expansion of what I've learned in the classroom. So from that, as I move forward in the budgeting season, I think it's so important that students do have access to these opportunities and career-related learning opportunities, as a lot of students in my class took this as an opportunity to explore healthcare fields. So members of Super SAC are looking forward to volunteering at Glencoe Elementary School next Friday, where they'll be helping out with a Valentine's Day party. This month, Super SAC students will also be heading to Salem to lobby for a budget that supports academic achievement and for a full week of outdoor school. Lastly, Super SAC also looks forward to providing input into the high school schedules for next year. So if you all have time, I encourage you to go to the Promise of Oregon's website and look at the video that was published today of a Roosevelt High School junior Tory Eagle staff. It really just highlights the importance of transformative education and the reason that we need to keep pushing for a budget that really supports our students. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mina. So before we have three very important and meaty topics tonight, so just a word to my colleagues beforehand, knowing that our presenters, staff have long presentations for us with a lot of information. If you could just hold, make a note of your comments and questions and hold those till the end, if at all possible, so that we can make sure they can get through their presentation, and then we'll have a full discussion. So just if you can just make notes as you go, we would really appreciate that. And with that, we'll get started on the first major topic, which is the 2015-16 budget and informational update on high school graduation rates and high school action teams updates. So Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce this item?
I would, and I'll ask Antonio Lopez, who is Assistant Superintendent for School Performance, to come on up and lead this presentation. We'll also have Jay James, who's the Senior Director of College and Career Readiness, Sarah Singer, Senior Director of System Planning and Performance, and Jocelyn Begay-Salter, Director of our Early Warning Systems, who will bring us up to date on our graduation rates and early warning system.
Thank you, Roseanne. Oh, yeah, those are nice.
Good evening, co-chairs Hutchins and Knowles, directors, student representative, and superintendent. My name is Antonio Lopez. I'm the assistant superintendent for the Office of School Performance. And the presentation that you're gonna hear today, we're gonna touch on several topics. And with your permission, what I would like to do is to go over the presentation, and then at the end, we will open and we'll entertain any of your questions. So we're gonna have Sarah Singer, Senior Director of System Planning and Performance, who's gonna go over our graduation and completion data. And we're gonna have Shay James, Senior Director of College and Career Readiness, along with Jocelyn Begay, Director of Early Warning Systems, and they will update progress on early warning systems, defining what an early warning system is, and the next steps in developing an implementation on the early warning systems. And then at the end, I will give you an overall presentation of the other systems that we're working in terms of aligning our high school.
Great. So hi, my name is Sarah Singer, Senior Director of System Planning and Performance, and I am going to present to you the data on completion and graduation rates. Before I do that, I just want to make sure that we're all kind of consistent in our definitions and our understanding. So this year, the state made a change on who counts as graduates. So one change is that modified diplomas are now count as part of the 4-year cohort graduation rate. In the past, those students would have been in our completer rate, which I'll get to in a minute. Just to be clear, to be eligible for modified diplomas, a student has to have a documented history of an inability to maintain grade level achievement due to significant learning and instructional barriers, or a documented history of a medical condition that creates a barrier to achievement. So students, just to recap, students who have modified diplomas are now part of what counts as a graduate. We're also going to talk, we hear a lot about the 4-year cohort graduation rate. Tonight we're also going to hear about the completion rate, so I just want to make sure people are aware of what the difference is between those two. So included in the completer rate are students who have graduated, who have earned a GED, or have earned what we call an extended or adult high school diploma. It should also be noted that in 2014, the GED was revamped to be more rigorous and to align with the Common Core state standards. Other changes to note are included as graduates are students who met the requirements to graduate but decided to stay a 5th year in school. So this is not going to be particularly pertinent to Portland Public Schools because we don't have students in this category, but other districts around the state have exercised this option. Those students typically go on to higher education for a year while they're still technically in the paid for by kind of the district funds. Okay, so to get to the data, what we have here is our 4-year cohort graduation rate over time, and starting with our 2008-9 number, which was really the first year that we collected cohort graduation rates, and we were at 53% that year. And we are, what we reported to the state this year was 70% graduation rate. That particular figure includes the modified diplomas. If you were to exclude the modified diplomas so that you have more of an apples to apples comparison, our graduation rate would have been 69%. So it impacted us by 1%, those changes. So overall, that's a 16 to 17% grad rate, depending on how you want to calculate it. And so if we look at 4-year completion and 5-year completion rates, which you're going to also see in comparison to the graduation rates, you're going to see that over time our 4-year completion rate has trended upwards slightly over the last several years. And you're also going to see that our 5-year completion rate has trended upwards. So basically we can say with confidence that our 4-year graduation, our 4-year completion, and our 5-year completion rate have been moving in the right direction. We have been making improvements over time. In comparison to the state of Oregon and other schools, the Oregon graduation rate is 72%. In 2009, they were at 66. And PPS in 2009, we were at 54. And then we've made a lot of growth over time, and we are now at 70. So we are 2 percentage points behind the state, but we are growing more rapidly. Our completion rate in comparison to Oregon is, we're both at 82%, and we have also shown significant growth in comparison to the state on completion rate. When we break out the 4-year cohort by race and ethnicity over the last several years, here's what you'll find. So our American Indian and Alaskan Native graduation rate is at 47%. This is the lowest of our racial and ethnic groups this year. Our Asian students are at 82%, and you see steady growth since 2010-11. Our Black students are at 60% this year. So this is what we experienced with our Black graduation rate for about 3 years was stagnation. So it was at 55% in 2010. In 11 and 12, we were around 53%. So we were just kind of, it's stagnant. So this year we jumped to 60%. So that is a bigger jump for that group. Our Hispanic graduation rate is at 56%. So while we've shown growth over time, over a 4-year period for Hispanic, for the Hispanic rate, it unfortunately dropped a percentage point in comparison to last year. Our Pacific Islander population, we had a significant increase in their graduation rate, and then our white population, we've seen steady growth over time. So if we think it's important to look at the data disaggregated by both gender and race. So that's what this picture will show. So our Asian females have an 88% graduation rate. And so what you'll see is data by gender and race. So white male is 71%. African American female is 65%. Hispanic Latino female is 63%. Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander male is 63%. Multiracial male, 62%. Black African American male is 55%. So you'll see a gap between Black African American females and Black African American males of 10 percentage points. 55% for American Indian and Alaska Native females, 51% for Hispanic Latino males, and then finally 38% for American Indian Alaska Native males. Four-year cohort graduation rates by school. So we used growth since 2009-10. So what you'll see is since that point in time, all of our comprehensive and/or focus option schools have experienced growth. Madison has grown 20 percentage points over that period of time. Franklin is another success story at 14 percentage points. So you'll see just that, and the total is for the comprehensives. Right now, our comprehensive and focus option grad rate is at 82%, and that's a 12% increase, 12 percentage point increase since 2009-10. Other notable highlights, MLC increased their graduation rate by 23 percentage points from the previous year. Summer Scholars, which is a summer school located at Benson, graduated 37 students this past summer, and that, we know, increased our graduation rate by 1 percentage point. The black-white achievement gap closed at Jefferson, Franklin, and Roosevelt. Specifically, I think Franklin had a 91% graduation rate for its African-American students. And the black-white achievement gap nearly closed at Benson and Madison within 2 percentage points. Roosevelt High School's graduation rate fell 11 points, and it should say to 53%, not from 53%. The rate still is up 11 points from the past 5 years. Interesting thing about Roosevelt is that they have a much higher 5-year graduation rate, or 5-year graduation rate. So a lot of their students don't necessarily make it in 4 years, but they do go on to enroll in a 5th year, and so that's sort of just something to note here. So when I look at when we compare the 4-year grad rate and the 5-year grad rate, and remember these are different sets of kids because they're different cohorts, so just keep that in mind. But what you do see is, for Roosevelt in particular, a pretty large difference. That 5th year really makes a difference. For Roosevelt, it makes a pretty big difference for Jefferson and Alliance as well. This is just something we've seen a lot with our schools that serve that have higher poverty concentrations or serve more historically underserved students. We tend to see that 5th year really makes a big difference. We see it in our alternative system as well, our CBOs. Other notable graduation rates for our economically disadvantaged, our graduation rate was 61%. That's up 6 percentage points from the past 4 years. Our limited English proficiency, or we like to call our emerging bilingual population, it has a graduation rate of 49%. That is up 11 percentage points from 4 years, from 2009-10. Special education at 50%, and that's up 18 percentage points. This modified diploma being included is especially going to impact the special education graduation rate. TAG is a 91% graduation rate, and then we see our female at 75% and our males at 66 percentage points, so we do see a gender gap in our graduation rate. And then one other important point to note is that for those students who join PPS in the 9th grade cohort, they have a 77% graduation rate. We get students who join us in 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade, and they're we might call late entrants, and their graduation rate is significantly lower, as you can see, 48, 41, and 34% respectively. We also have a group of students who've actually never enrolled at PPS that are still part of our cohort, and those students live in PPS boundaries, but they go to, for example, an MESD-run school like Helensview. So there's not a lot of them, but they do count in our cohort. So when you add up all the students who joined in 10th grade or sort of after or never enrolled, that was 18% of our cohort this year. Last year it was about the same. It was about 20%. So this is kind of a consistent figure for us. And so with that, I am going to hand it over to Shay James, Senior Director of our Office of College and Career Readiness, and she's going to talk about one of our critical strategies on how we're addressing graduation and completion rates.
Thank you. Good evening, Board of Directors and Superintendent Smith. As Assistant Superintendent Lopez mentioned tonight, we are providing you an update of where we are on the implementation of our early warning system. We want to highlight the prior work which functioned as a catalyst for moving towards implementing systemic approach. Let me actually turn that on. Thank you. Which functioned as a which functioned as a catalyst for moving towards implementing a systemic approach, focusing on intervening early and often, using personalization strategies, and emphasizes a continuum of services for 6 through 12. The early warning system is incorporating successful strategies from our high school graduation project. The High School Graduation Initiative Project is a 5-year federal grant awarded in 2010, providing 11 schools with outreach coordinators, as well as additional supports for partners such as Campfire, Step Up, and additional alternative school slots. The grant sunsets September 2015. However, we are dedicated to systemically adopting some of its most promising practices. Through the work of the High School Action Team, which involved year-long work teams that included teachers, parents, students, principals, central office administrators, community, and board members, an early warning system was defined as one that works to retain students in their local school to decrease the need for alternative options for youth who are younger and on track without compromising services to all students across the continuum. The continuum we are referring to provides supports to all youth through prevention, intervention, and re-engagement. A point to note in this definition is that we are also addressing the recommendations put forth from the segmentation analysis you have all previously received, which builds capacity in our schools so that we are not just decreasing the need for alt options for younger students, but working towards serving students at their home school. An external evaluation was conducted to evaluate the impact of the HSGI project. One key finding that we have not been able to measure in the past is students who participate in after-school programming, such as Campfire, Step Up, or Sun Schools, begin to make academic improvements after receiving 750 hours of service. Jocelyn Begay-Salter, who has led the HSGI work under multiple pathways to graduation, is going to highlight some of the other areas where HSGI has made an impact on accelerating graduation rates. While this finding is exciting, we do want to note that this is a very intensive model with 750 hours equaling 94 days of participation for each student.
Good evening, Board of Directors and Superintendent Smith. As I highlight some of the areas of impact I want to mention, the success of the HSGI project was not possible without cross-department collaboration, building-level engagement, and a collective teaming approach from all. Tonight we are highlighting a few of our high-profile strategies that significantly impacted graduation efforts. HSGI had significant impact beginning with the staffing team strategy. We worked very closely with building personnel to establish staffing teams that parallel student intervention or care teams. Staffing teams included key building personnel such as counselors, administrators, partners like Sun and Step Up, Campfire, attendance coordinators, and outreach coordinators. These teams met weekly and coordinate intervention efforts for students by name. Another area of impact was examining and refining the academic priority list. For accuracy, it is a tool we use to bring students at risk to the surface. Students are identified using the following indicators: attendance, grades, and at the time, the OAK scores. We improved the reports in collaboration with research and evaluation, as well as by using the Mary Beth Cilio Portland Public Schools cohort study done a few years back. This is one of the initial efforts to identify students earlier and in a more useful way. Assisting rising ninth graders in their transition into high school, as Sarah pointed out, is a huge piece of the work as well. This is another area where HSGI has been effective. Through these efforts, we have warmly handed off 656 students to high school staff, partners, and other outreach coordinators. Recent credit recovery efforts are yet another area of HSGI impact for students by name. In our first full year of service, HSGI served 331 seniors who were close to graduating but had needed additional supports. We impacted 21% of those 331 students and helped them to graduate. The subsequent year, due to more intentional collaboration, we served 321 seniors that were close to graduation, and 88% were able to graduate, the majority of which were students of color. Based on this success, as a district, we are now investing more intentionally in providing school site credit recovery options. This past June, for example, we were able to provide credit recovery options at every one of our high schools, as well as do away with any financial barriers seniors might have had that would keep them from graduating by providing summer scholars tuition or tuition reimbursement. The effort set forth in June assisted an additional 42 seniors in graduating, doubling our summer graduation rate. So as Shane mentioned, she referred to a continuum. When we talk about a continuum of services, this is essentially what we're talking about, services that really address all subsets of the population. In order to meet the goal of building a systemic school-level approach, we must function within a continuum where all subsets of the population, grades 6 through 12, have access to supports and are provided an entry point for either staying on track, a focus on the prevention side of the spectrum, or getting back on track. This calls for building an infrastructure in our schools that allows families and students to access support services such as Sun School or Step Up, or instructional opportunities like credit recovery, CTE, advanced scholars, or reconnection center services. It also provides teachers, counselors, and administrators with a menu of support services to better serve all of our students. Using the criteria from the high school action team developed, this is what a continuum of services would begin to look like. It is an early warning system comprised of tangible engagement opportunities such as credit recovery, learning and credit options, CTE, middle school youth supports, participation in partner programming, and effective student progress communication to families. It also has more functioning elements, such as school intervention and early warning system advisory teams, as well as a system-level early warning monitoring and reporting tools. To provide you with examples of the work, we will highlight one of the new progress reporting tools that families will receive. So the Notice of Progress Toward Graduation report will be mailed out to families twice a year. It will provide families with a more reader-friendly Students' Progress Toward Graduation report. You'll see here where families will now receive this letter, and it will clearly indicate whether their student is off track or on track. It provides them with a list of subjects, shows the required credits for graduation, the credits earned by the student, and their essential skills and personalized learning progress. Sarah Singer will now speak a little bit about the new dashboard monitoring tool.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So we have something that's called the data dashboard. It provides real-time data to administrators and counselors and select other school-based staff. So one of the pieces of work that my department has done in collaboration with the Office of College and Career Readiness, IT, and some school-based staff is to improve this dashboard tool and specifically to align it around the superintendent's 3 priorities, one of which is to accelerate the graduation and completion rate. So one of the products from this effort is a new dashboard report that tracks, this is just an example, we've actually created a couple of these reports, but this one tracks attendance and tardies by period for every student. So in the past, and this is really going to be more relevant for 6th grade and up, but before we didn't have the ability to actually say, is a student missing one period more than another? And so now we have a real-time data source for administrators, counselors, and other select school staff to do that. We also have a report for school-based personnel administrators that tells whether or not students are actually on track to graduate based on credits and their essential skills. Again, that was not something we had in the past. Some of the latest budget investments have enabled us to be able to produce this type of thing. In order to create the report, what we did is we had what we called a data action team. So in that team was some school-based personnel, IT, people from Office of College and Career Readiness, and we designed the report, and then we went out and did several focus groups, one with counselors to say, hey, does this work for you? What doesn't work for you? And we also did another focus group with administrators to do the same sort of thing. And so that's how this design process has worked.
So you heard our student representative mention CTE tonight, and as we work towards building the early warning system, we are intentionally examining all potential engagement and re-engagement opportunities district-wide, especially for our males. CTE has surfaced as an example and an opportunity of this. According to the National Research Center of Career and Technical Education, earning 3 or more CTE credits within a focused pathway was second only to 9th grade students' grade point average as the strongest variable affecting high school survival for boys.
As you can see, there is a lot of good work that is going on. And we're very excited about the gains on high school graduation, but we know that we still have a lot of work to do. So part of the work is how do we build this continuum? How do we build strong elementary schools? How do we make sure that our kids are reading by 3rd grade? And how do we make sure that at the middle schools we engage our students? Because if they're not successful in 3rd grade, we're going to start seeing in middle grades where they start disengaging from the system, and that contributes to dropout or students not being successful in high school. So you heard about the early response system. I want to just give you a brief presentation about the other systems that we're working. We're putting a lot of emphasis in the middle school, like I say, because that is an area where we need to make sure that those kids that are disengaged, how do we engage them? So we're exploring outdoor school to make it a week long the way it was, because we know that these are the events in the students' lives that it's a hook and it's something that they're looking forward. We're also looking at the 7th grade level, how do we get students to experiential learning, looking at makerspace and other areas in which they get to show their talents, in which they also engage our teachers in how they can work with students in different modalities and where students can show, again, what they're capable. Like, they can do projects on 3D printers and things like that. The other one that it is also very important is how do we expose our kids to college? Because we know that this is an area that the early we do it, the better. And part of that also, so in 8th grade we will have college visits. We also want to work with our students and our families. And Director Bill sent me an email because we have a lot of students in Oregon that are not taking, that are not applying for some of the money that is available for college. So how do we make sure that our PPS students are applying for those? So how do we engage the families? And how do we engage the students? Because knowing how to access those grants, it's important. And in terms of the CTE, how do we create this continuum of awareness, exploration, and preparation? The awareness that in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade is we want students to find out what they're interested, what field are they interested on. And this is an area that, you know, when you ask our middle school students, what are you interested, they might not be able to tell you. So how do we expose them to what is out there, the different fields? That is the awareness aspect. The exploration aspect is where a student goes deeper and we expose them, we take them to the different companies that are here, like Caterpillar or Daimler, or to the hospital, so they can explore it deeper in terms of their interests. And the preparation is where students, they're gonna be able to have a program study. This is where they're really committed. This is what I wanna do. This is where students can do job shadowing. They can do internships. This is where students can take dual credit classes. This is where students can learn an apprenticeship, or they can earn a that will help them later on, if whatever choice they decide, if careers. The other one that we know it is important is to develop our athletics at the middle grades, because that's another system that that makes a difference for our kids. So as you can see, these are the different systems that we're trying to build, and how do we create this continuum. So our goal is 100% of our kids to be successful for post-secondary education. Lastly, these are the areas that we're currently working on in terms of increased graduation rates. You heard about the early warning system. Also, how do we develop better data systems? And you heard about how we're gonna let parents know if their student is on track to graduation. How do we engage the families early on? And also, how do we improve attendance? And lastly, alternative learning opportunities that can include credit recovery, Saturday school, virtual scholars, all those opportunities for the kids will have to make up for in areas that they're struggling. In terms of college and career preparation, this year we're planning to have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. And actually we're working with some of you to help us develop that plan. How do we expand accelerated and dual credit opportunities? How to build on the existing career-related learning CTE plans, and how do we standardize yearly guidance and curriculum plans? And lastly, in terms of aligning existing high school systems work, we were able to create the Office of College and Career Readiness, and they're looking at college and career readiness strategic roadmap, dual credit, credit recovery, career learning, and we're working with Bonnie Hobson in how do we increase our AVID schools and Gear Up. So that's the end of our presentation, and we'll be more than happy to entertain any of your questions on high school or early warning systems, or just the overall continuum.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you to my colleagues for your patience in accumulating questions and letting this wonderful team finish their presentation. So now, I'm sure there are questions, comments. Who would like to begin? Maybe Director Knowles, since usually you have to wait till the very end. No. Just an offer, just an offer.
Actually, while you guys are coming up with
Yeah.
questions, can we acknowledge the high school principals who are here with us in the
that would
audience
be
and just
great.
ask you guys to wave, because we've got a number of our high school principals here with us. Thank you.
Director Morton. Oh, you are ready to go?
I got one.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Director Knowles.
So I think this is for Sarah. I'm just trying to get the completion rate straight in my head. So can you just, I don't understand the difference between, what's the difference between a fifth year and a completer rate? Is it, or?
So, okay. So you can complete in either 4 or 5 years, just like you can graduate in either 4 or 5 years. So a completer, what's different about a completer versus someone
Right.
who's just a graduate, I'm going to start there, is that a completer is somebody who either graduated or they basically got their GED. I mean, that's.
So where it says here graduated on this slide,
Yeah.
it really is someone who didn't graduate. I guess, why does it say graduated is where I got confused.
So.
It's the grand total of everyone who graduated plus had the GED.
Right, so a completion rate is always gonna be higher than the 4-year cohort rate, because it's gonna
So we had
include everyone who
1,300 kids who
graduated,
graduated.
plus everyone who got a
All of our
GED.
schools. Is that
I
right?
guess that's what it says, yeah.
Okay. So we had 1,350 kids who graduated from all of our high schools.
Well-
And then we had 112 who got their GEDs.
Yeah, actually, and that number right there, it should actually be 175 that got a GED. That's just the white population that's on there. I was just noticing
Okay.
that. That's why I kind of scooted through that. But yeah, so we had in our cohort, we had 3,318 students, and 175 of those got their GED.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Because it's I just got confused.
Yeah, that's easy.
And then I had a question about the 5-year issue that we've been talking about, where students can actually graduate but stay on for another. Do we have anything in our current policies that prohibits students from doing that, from staying for a fifth? We don't.
We don't have anything currently in the policy, and we are doing research on that right now currently, and have a meeting coming up shortly, and we'll be able to report back to you all.
Do we know if we
that
have?
information.
Sorry, Shay. Do we know if we have very many students who are doing that?
We don't have any who
We
are
don't
doing
have
that
any.
currently.
Okay.
In PPS.
And
Okay.
something you have to proactively decide to do, because once somebody's awarded a diploma, you keep paying their tuition.
Right.
And
Right.
it's something that some of the smaller districts have done
Right.
intentionally as a program, and there's been concern if the larger districts did it,
Right.
that you're breaking the state school fund, and we're looking at either going forward and doing it and encouraging the state to come up with some kind of a category of funding that addresses that in between
Right.
Right.
community college and the.
But we don't have anything in our policies right now
No,
that
that
prohibit our
prohibits us from
students from doing it.
No,
Right.
we don't.
Okay. So,
Right, and it's being hailed as a really innovative, wonderful thing to do, which, yes, but it's also coming out of K-12 funding. So
So
I think it's.
it cuts down the amount of money we all have for the 12 years, 13. So I'm just going to kind of work through this just a little bit. I do want to say I was so happy to see our graduation rates go up again. So thank you to everybody, the principals, all of our staff, everybody. That was such fantastic news. I know it's just going up a little bit each year, but I've been on the board for 6 years, and now it's like 12 points or 17 points when I started. Wow. So slow and steady, I guess, but much as I would love to see it all jump up to 100% right now, the slow and steady, we're getting there, and I just have to say thank you to everybody who's worked so hard on all of that. And then my other question was around summer scholars. You mentioned that there was the Summer Scholars Program last year was free for some. When is that free? Because that was one of the concerns I had earlier, a couple of weeks ago when we had a presentation, and it indicated summer scholars, we charged students for that, and I was hoping that we could fix that.
So the June effort was very intentional for seniors in Summer Scholars, and what we did was we offered the schools. So it was a coupling of funding, right? So schools were offered credit recovery dollars to provide credit recovery options, providing a priority, right? So seniors that were 2 credits from graduating were the priority before August 31st. If seniors were already, because we did it in June, some seniors and their families had already decided that they're going to do summer scholars. So what we were able, if they paid for it, we actually reimbursed them this past fall. If they had a barrier, counselors often know about that, and so that money also went toward providing them with tuition. So in addition to that, we also provided transportation, so bus tickets for summer scholars. So that was all a part of that effort to eliminate barriers to either graduating or getting back on track.
Okay. And then I had a question about AVID, and where are we with AVID in the middle schools? I saw there's a grant possibility, so I'm thinking.
And actually, we're going to bring some, yes, we have an opportunity from 2 partners. One is to expand our AVID at the high school level, and it's something that we would get dollars from the partner to do a number of aspects of the training and build the libraries, and we would need to put up some money, so you're going to see this come forward in the budget ask where we need to pay for people's time to actually participate in the training. And then we have a second funding source that is interested in supporting us expanding AVID in our middle schools. So we currently have AVID in 2 of our middle schools and 3 of our high schools. This would allow us to expand across all of our middle schools and all of our high schools if all of the principals are interested in doing it, and we're in that process right now.
And that includes the elementary model.
I was going to say 6-8
as well.
Okay.
Although I will say the middle school one does all the middle schools, and we would pilot 1 K-8, and then we're general fund funding the elementary general fund and or title. So
I'll stop there so other people can get a turn.
Other folks who would like to go next? Director Morton.
So I don't know if I have any questions, maybe some general comments. And I have to say I kind of struggled with the flow of tonight's presentation with a summary of our graduation rates, which I appreciate that summary, and the transition into some of the tools that we're using currently, early warning system, some tracking tools, and I think I've been particularly around when I can see such drastic differences in four-year cohort graduation rates across particularly communities of color. I wonder where our human contact is in this, and this be meaning that and notice the progress towards graduation, a dashboard. These are really important tools for us to be able to track, for us to be able to record, hopefully for us to be able to create an early warning system that allows us to understand. I mean, I think I mentioned this last year when we talked about it, or before the budget process, that ninth grade is not an early warning system. That's a pretty late warning system. But I really am left thinking, gosh, what do we do when we have 400 to 500 kids per counselor? Is the dashboard going to help us with those students? Probably not. But we might be able to track them as they drop out. I also, was kind of struck at, National Research Center for Career and Technical Education says CTE is a strong predictor for boys staying in high school. Another really strong indicator, I think, is authentic relationships with teachers and counselors and adults and peers in the classrooms and in the building. And I would really love to hear, how are we building relationships with our students? Because particularly across our students of color, I know within the Native community, we have a generational relationship that has been broken, and one that I don't see specific efforts in repairing that relationship. And that's what I'm really curious about. If we're serious about increasing beyond an incremental bump, to me, you know, a 44% graduation rate for Native students versus a 47% graduation for Native students, I can be thankful that it rose by 3%, but less than half the kids in my community are graduating. So I'm really interested in hearing how we take this information and how we take these tools, and how do we use these to really supplement the personal relationship building work that's happening with our kids in our schools. So that was kind of my really just unvarnished struggle with this, and perhaps this presentation isn't the presentation to talk about that, but it's really something for future reference that I'm interested in hearing about. So that wasn't the question. That was just a...
Well, just to let you know that when we think about the early learning systems, really it goes all the way to elementary school. I mean, to the primary grades, right? One of the things that we're proposing in this budget is to look at the counselor ratio for middle schools. So we're gonna come with some ideas, you know, and like I said, this will be up for discussion in terms of the budget. But that's why we're looking, figure out ways in which we can engage our families early on. How do we work with our CBOs, with community-based organizations, so they can help us reach our communities of color, not only underrepresented, but also in terms of the linguistical.
So Director Martin, I so appreciate that reflection. I do want to address a bit of what you spoke to. The relationship piece is critical. And I started my segment with acknowledgement to the collaboration that takes place. And I also agree with you. I don't think it was captured in this presentation, maybe in the way that we could have captured it. But some of the pieces that are taking place are very relationship-based. So working with, you know, the Office of Equity and Partnership, Dunya Minu and Sun School Step Up, a plethora of other individuals like the new attendance coordinators, outreach coordinators, counselors. A lot of the impact that's taken place has very little. We do monitor, we do analyze, we do track, right? But it has a lot more to do with the relationship of a Charles McKinney, who's at Franklin as an outreach coordinator, and the relationship of Amber McGill, or the relationship of Sylvia, or the relationship of Holly, the counselor, with those students. And the relationship of those students with all of those individuals simultaneously. So there is a lot taking place at the ground level that is, unfortunately, I wasn't able to capture very well because, you know, we're trying to provide an update. And I think that there is opportunity to tell those stories as well. Because handing 656 students warmly to counselors and VPs, vice principals, and other outreach coordinators is not just here's a name. It's I did a house visit, I made phone calls, I got to know the family. You know, the family is now meeting with their new vice principal or their new principal or their new counselor. We're making phone calls during the summer. The high school staff are to the rising ninth graders. So there's a lot that does take place that is very relationship based because our communities, the Latino community as well, has a lot of stake in the ground, and we owe our communities that access. So there is a lot taking place, and I'm sorry that wasn't captured here, and I think there's opportunity to do that.
And I really appreciate you offering that clarity, and I think that as we're moving closer, sort of inching into budget time, I think it's really important for us to, as a board and as executive staff who will be presenting a budget, is that we're looking for that, what is that human element? What is that relational piece that we can build upon and we can invest in, because that's going to be the difference maker. It's the tip of the spear for what we do as a district, and it makes all the difference in the world. So I appreciate you bringing that, and I appreciate
Great.
it. Thanks.
No, thank you. How about folks? Director Belisle?
Well, first I just want to say, Director Morton, that your unvarnished is better than my polished. But thank you for providing that frame, because I found myself with a public testimony earlier today hearing about an attendance initiative that then lost its funding. Here we get high school graduation knowing that they're building connections with students and buildings, and now it's being defunded. And so I just wanted to highlight that I hope we're continuing that as we begin to look in our budget. And when I hear Director Morton talk about early warning systems, really one of the earliest warning systems that we have in our K-12 system is attendance in kindergarten. There's a clear pattern of students whose attendance is not very good in kindergarten as we've tracked them through our schools. And so I hope that we're really looking at that and investing, because I do think that it involves that human relationship. How do we transition students into school? And so we've been spending a lot of time in other parts of my life looking at attendance and what are practices that really make the difference. And it really is about teachers engaging. It's really about the school system engaging person to person. So I was really glad to hear you talk about teachers. How do we free up or make available those opportunities to allow our educators reach out to the students to build those relationships before or after? We have folks in our audience who are still holding up signs saying, please hear us, and it's about going to our community, not expecting them to always come to us. So I just want to really highlight that as we look at our budget. I also was surprised that I didn't hear much about teaching practices, because once we get the students here, right, how are we making whatever we're doing? Yes, CTE, yes, but those have been in schools before, and we've consistently had a disparate outcome. So what are we doing? Can somebody talk to me about how are we evaluating our educators, or how are we supporting our educators to make sure that what they're teaching is engaging them in a way that feels relevant and responsive?
I think what I could share and offer is that we have done a lot of cross-collaboration work between the departments, and in the next two presentations, you're going to hear some of those deeper dives of where we're going, kind of in that human way, right, with kids and with teachers, and what are some of the strategies that we're utilizing for our students of color, our Males of Color Pledge, and with Office of Teaching and Learning. So I think you're going to get some of that as we go further into the presentations this evening.
Great, thank you. I also want to highlight something that I had mentioned maybe now a month or two ago after I went to the Courageous Conversations Conference about how for Native American youth especially, cultural identity, actually not investing in more tutoring. Investing in more tutoring didn't actually get the outcomes we were hoping for, but it was about cultural identity. How do we provide them a sense of belonging and sense of positive self, and history about what systems they're working and navigating? So again, as we look at budgets, I'd be really curious about how do we invest to be intentional about that. And then my last question is about the slide that talks about the late entrants. The folks who come to us in 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, or never enroll. I'm curious how, that seems like a pretty sizable 20% of our cohort. I'm curious, do we have any statistics on how that compares with other districts in our area or in the state?
I don't right off the top of my head, but I think that would be something important to look at.
Because I've heard other districts I know in our area talk about how if we have them at 9th grade, there's a really good chance, and I'm just not sure what our numbers look like compared to. Thanks.
Great. Dr. Buell.
I think I have 20 questions.
Well,
for our map.
let's get cracking.
Okay. Roosevelt, 53%. What are we doing now that we weren't doing then? Anything, or we can look at 53% next year and the next year? I mean, are we doing something at Roosevelt to to turn around a 53% graduation rate that's specific to Roosevelt that we're doing now that we weren't doing then?
Yeah, so I know that there's been an attendance initiative with coordinators, some attendance coordinators that are specific for the Roosevelt cluster, and I'm hoping that you'll hear a little bit more about that in the presentation that's going to come after us as well. We're also looking at some of the programming that's happening there, so CTE programming. They've also adopted advanced scholars, and also just, core, how are we moving students through that? And, looking at STEM and STEAM, George and Roosevelt were recipients of a sizable ODE grant in order to implement some really specific strategies around there. So we're moving in the right direction with Roosevelt, and Charlene is spearheading for the cluster. She was previously the principal there and is now the senior director of the cluster and is also working.
So we're doing an attendance initiative of some sort. Are we adding any people? Like we had cut the social service coordinator out of there. Are we putting her back or somebody back in that position? We had a big drop after she left. Are we putting somebody back in that position?
So I'm going to do a couple things in here, just because Roosevelt, the point that when we were talking about people who enter after 9th grade, Roosevelt's cohort that we were just looking at, 208 students, 40 of them entered after 9th grade. 28 of those are still with us this year in their 5th year. And as you saw, like for Roosevelt, that was a situation that was really pronounced at Roosevelt, where you had a large number. And part of our effort at Roosevelt has been to bring kids back to Roosevelt, and we've been successful. We've increased enrollment. We've successfully brought kids back to Roosevelt, and some of them are coming back after 9th grade. And I think some of our effort now is what are the kind of supports we need to build if they're coming back and they're not on track. If they're coming back, we're looking deeper now at where did they come from and what are the kind of supports we need to be adding specifically that support them if they're coming back and entering. Because we know even a single transition in your high school time creates a challenge for you in terms of being on track. So that's one thing. Two, one of the things we're doing in this budget cycle, as you know, is looking at our school-wide support table, which is looking at people like counseling ratios, social workers, any other kind of supports that are that we're putting in buildings, and that's one of the efforts of the district staffing team, is taking a look at people like Nora, the kind of role that Nora provided at Roosevelt, the attendance coordinators that you're seeing that we're doing in a cluster as opposed to school specific, but it's adding other support people and really looking at what are the ones that are going to be most high leverage in terms of the kind of impacts we're looking for. So those would be two things.
So we have attendance coordinators that are going to be new next year to Roosevelt, or they're new this year?
We've got some that are new this year.
And what role do they play?
Supporting kids and families and going
to
to
homes. They go out to homes and
attendance, yes.
So they act as counselors, so to speak?
You guys can speak. This is more.
So they're working alongside the counselor. So if you think of it as building the infrastructure, they are part of the puzzle that wraps around the student. And so the counselor, as we know, has 400 students on their caseload. They don't have the capacity to go do home visits.
I've been talking about
so the attendance, right? So the attendance coordinator and an outreach coordinator they are specific for that. So they're not just tracking attendance and making calls to the house, but they're actually making home visits. They're inviting the family in. They are literally sometimes picking up the student or picking up the family for a visit to the school. So they build capacity in a way that the counselors I know want to do, but don't have the time to do that. And so again, it's about building an infrastructure where we're wrapping students around, putting a puzzle together so that we build the capacity to wrap the student with the right supports that are specific for them. So not every student will have an attendance coordinator, but that student may have an outreach coordinator. So we're trying to figure out very intentionally how to personalize services for their needs. And so that's the job of an attendance coordinator or an outreach coordinator.
So there's 2 people this year that they didn't have last year?
So currently, so that's a question so currently there's an outreach coordinator under the HSGI grant. So that coordinator has been at Roosevelt Roosevelt cluster for the last 3.5 years, and we added an attendance coordinator.
So that you added 1 person?
I'm not sure what the number is.
FTE,
Yeah, we
full
can find
FTE?
out exactly how many attendance coordinators for the Roosevelt cluster. I mean, there are many schools.
Let's keep going with your list.
Mr. Bilal says that there were 3 people added this year?
And that may very well be true.
Okay.
So my function is I collaborate with the person who oversees the attendance coordinators, who's Dunya Minu, and we have a great collaborating relationship. But I don't know exactly. There were a number of folks hired to help with this effort, and so I'm not exactly sure how many are at the Roosevelt. But it sounds 3 sounds right, but I can't confirm.
So that could be followed between. Maybe we can keep going with your list of questions.
okay,
And a couple were
I'll
just
keep moving
hired,
here.
like a
They
minute
literally-
ago, like they
Number
literally were
2.
just added, so.
That CTE will be online next year at Roosevelt?
Yes, so we are currently working, we've identified 5 areas that Roosevelt will be, 5 pathways that Roosevelt will be implementing over the next few years. So they will have, starting with engineering for next year, and then there are 4 other pathways that they will be adding as well.
So next year, there's going to be 5 classes of CTE that they didn't have this year?
No, so 5 pathways that Roosevelt will be implementing over the next couple of years. And when I say pathways, state certified CTE programs and pathways. So they'll be starting with engineering, and then we've identified the others that will be implemented and currently working on the timeline, teacher certification, and all of the components that come with that.
So what's our best guess, how many new classes of CTE will there be at Roosevelt this coming year that weren't there this year?
Right, so
Do we have
part
an
of
idea?
that will depend on student numbers, forecasting. I can't give you an exact number, but the opportunity will be presented for students that want to take that. So we will make, if we need to make 5 classes of that, we'll make, 1 pathway, we will. If we need to make 3, we will, and go from there. Are you talking about classes or courses? Pathways?
Well, I'm saying courses and classes is the same thing.
No, they're not.
Well, I'm saying them, I'm using them as the same. In other words, if I'm a kid at Roosevelt High School next year, I get what I can sign up for.
Correct.
How many CTE classes are on there that I can sign up for that are new?
Right. So we're working on that right now. We will have a few entry-level classes in CTE programs that won't maybe yet be state certified. There's a whole process that we have to go through with that, and we're working on that. We have a few teachers in place there. They've been, Philippe and Sue Brent and a few others have been working very hard on that. So what I can tell you is that there will be CTE courses offered at Roosevelt next year, and we will be developing the 5 certified pathways over the next few years. And I think in a pretty short period of time, we'll be able to give you a timeline and nail down the specifics.
How many care teams do they have at around the school? How many kids have care teams that are working with them? The SIT teams, correct? Let's take Madison. Madison, how many kids actually went through a care team process that we had set up in some way to work with a particular child at Madison last year, approximately? I mean, was it 190 or was it 3?
Yeah.
Or was it none? I don't
Are
know.
you talking about care teams or sit teams?
I'm interchanging the two because they keep getting interchanged as they keep getting interchanged in discussions here. Are they different?
Oh, I see.
They different?
Yeah.
No, so we have the equity care teams, and then we also reference the care teams that were used in Hillsborough. So
Yeah,
that's
kinda
why
what I'm
we're,
doing too.
right, that's
So
confusing.
what do we have? What are we specifically calling at Madison High School?
Sit teams.
Sit teams, that's
Sit
what I thought. So
teams.
how many kids last year or this year at Madison High School in the first half of the year, approximately did our sit teams actually, you want to use the word service? Service would be fine. Any?
So we can get you the answer to that. Currently, we
Madison.
are implementing through the early warning system in collaboration with the Office of Equity and Partnership, Rick Kirschman, we are implementing SIT teams in 3 of our clusters, Franklin, Jefferson, and Roosevelt.
But not Madison.
Well, Madison has a function of a SIT team. We are currently, however, in a more formal fashion, implementing SIT teams in those 3 clusters. It's because of a grant that we received out of the state.
But are we implementing sit teams in Madison next year without the grant? I mean, this seems to
The
be
goal-
like this seems to be
yes.
such a critical thing. But the answer to my first question is none. We didn't have
No,
any
that's
sit
not,
teams.
that's
Or
not
we
the,
did?
that's not the answer. The answer is
Okay.
they have a form of a SIT team.
Okay.
And we are also formally doing them in 3 other clusters. The objective is to create SIT teams throughout all of our clusters.
Okay.
That's the ultimate goal.
Have we created the first half of this year? Had we created any sit teams in any of our schools?
Yes.
Okay. In Madison, have we created any the first half of this year?
I will get you the answer to that.
Okay.
Next question.
I'm just
And
trying
actually,
to
I'm
think
just
if
going
we
to
have-
remind people when we use acronyms to say what they
Yeah,
stand
I don't
for,
know
so
which
other
one.
people understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, so
It's fine.
SIT is school.
They're fine. That's what I hadn't.
SIT stands for Student Intervention Team.
So how many kids do we, if we take this, I was confused when we talked about the 750 hours on this section under the high school graduation initiative project. That's the grants that we've got?
That's the federal grant.
That's the new grants for the SIT teams.
That's the grant that was awarded in 2010. It's a federal grant out of the United States Department of Education. And the new grant is it's an early warning system grant to implement an early warning system out of the state. It was awarded this past year.
Right, and it's wonderful that we're doing that, by the way. But what's the 760 hours over a year or after-school participation, what it takes to improve grades and attendance? What's 50 hours of the kid or 750 hours of the
No,
teacher?
of participation, of participation. So we have an external evaluator that evaluated elements of the HSGI program or project grant. And one of the findings is that 750 hours of participation by a student per year is what it takes to actually improve significantly attendance and their academics.
750 hours of participation in what?
In after-school programming.
Sun School, Step Up.
Right.
Campfire, any of the
So
after-school partners.
after-school programming includes, does that include athletics?
Well, and that is a great point. So part of, as we noted, that's an intensive model. It's almost 94 days of participation for a student. So part of the work in the early warning system is how do we honor that finding, knowing that it's an intensive after-school model, but perhaps use it as a tiered system. And so we use things like, maybe it's the athletics, the middle school athletics. Maybe it's coupled with some other sort of support service during the day. So Step Up provides support services during the day as well, not just after school. So maybe it's a Saturday school. So we're trying to be creative about that 750 hours because we know that it's an intensive model and not all programs. It's also expensive for programs like Sun School or Step Up to be able to hit that goal. And so how do we do it in collaboration with them, but using and leveraging the existing support pieces that can add up to that so that we're impacting students?
So just to note that we do have 2 more lengthy and important presentations tonight.
Tell
So
them
Director
to shorten
Buell,
their answers, maybe.
but and also if you can maybe highlight, just sort of
Yeah.
pick the questions that are most important to you, and maybe some of them
Okay,
can
I
be
got
staff.
it. I have the ones marked with stars that are the most important to
Fabulous.
me. That's good.
Okay.
The period by period, I think that I have teacher friends who would like to have me ask this question. The period by period attendance we're going to put on the dashboard. That means we're taking attendance every period. including tardies, and we're recording them some way. They're doing it on the computer, right? They just pop it on there, and it all comes in automatically.
Yep.
Right, okay. You said that we had a focus group that had counselors and administrators
Correct.
on it?
Yep.
But no teachers?
Yeah, so here's the deal with that. Unfortunately, our data dashboard right now is not accessible to teachers. And this is something we're working on, it's a really top priority for us, working with IT on this. The tool has the personally identifiable information for 47,000 of our students, literally their home phone number, all the way to who they live with. And we need a way to be able to limit which data various folks see. And so it's a very, very high priority for us to get the data dashboard into the hands of teachers, but we have, and actually our community partners for that matter, like Step Up, like some of these partners, but we need to be able to ensure the privacy of that information, and we're not able to do that yet. So that, and that's, we're working on that literally right now in hopes that we'll have something up next year. So that's why we don't have that for teachers. This was literally just a view for administrators and ours, and like I said, select school staff.
CTE in middle school, do we have any plans that are actually plans, not just thinking about it down the line, looking at it, but actually do we have anything in planning that we're looking at around CTE in middle school?
Yeah, so for this year, Jeannie Yurkovich, who has led CTE for quite some time, has really been doing a lot of intensive research to see if we can get experiential learning opportunities for our youth, our middle grade programs this year. We're running into a few roadblocks with capacity issues, so we're creating a kind of a menu of options that that we'd be able to present to our school, students would be able to access. So it might not look the same across every school for capacity, but we're going to be working on that for future. But we are working on that for this year.
So next year you might see some CTE in some middle schools that we don't have now?
I think that we'll see some opportunities this year, and yes, you will also see additional CTE opportunities, equipment, and some other components for next year.
Okay, I'm moving down the line here.
Thank you.
We have a one of the things that people brought up was culturally relevant curriculum, particularly history and so forth. Mr. Morton referenced that, and do we have any plans for that kind of an improvement? Culturally relevant curriculum, particularly around, let's say, history in the elementary grades, first 8th grade?
So I know the OTL is looking on the adoption of the language arts, am I right? And so we have a team that is looking at what is out there and how it's addressing the cultural relevancy that we need our curriculum to have.
Okay, last question maybe?
Oh, sure, and I also want to make sure our student representative gets
Did
a
you want
chance to
to
weigh in.
Sure, just maybe not necessarily something you have to answer tonight, but how can we link 8th grade reports of attendance, especially using our system, to high schools? So the student comes in not like right there, their target, rather than the month goes by and then the attendance pops up.
Yeah, so we actually have some dashboard reports that do allow our high school principals to view incoming information about the students that they serve actually currently in the dashboard. I think the biggest challenge is making sure that people know that they exist and that they know how to navigate and get to them, and so we're working on creating kind of some more training around that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Last one. Franklin's new system, they were pretty upset. A lot of teachers seem to be about the having difficulty with the relationships with the students with the new system. It just, you know, and yet we say that that's our almost the critical thing for keeping kids in school is that relationship with teachers and staff and so forth. And I just thought I'd kind of reference that. I don't know, I hope we do some real good work around that next year, Franklin.
Which new system are you talking about?
Which system?
Well, where you put, they moved teachers out of the classrooms during the day and so forth up into the offices and that type of stuff where I know they tried to make as much effort as they could to kind of make it work, but the whole idea, you know, we kind of bought into that model of redesigning that school, so I don't know what they're gonna do. So, okay, whatever, I just was referencing it.
So
Thank
we'll
you.
look into it.
Thank you very much.
I have an answer about the coordinators. We confirmed it is 3. Just wanna make
Okay.
sure.
Thank you very
That
much.
is what?
That was 3 coordinators, attendance coordinators.
You were right, Director.
So, thank you so much. Thank you. So, thanks everybody for your good questions and discussion. I'll just say briefly, for my part, I really appreciate the disaggregation, not just by race but by gender, and that you shine the light on that. It's really important. Like everybody, I want to just applaud the great work of the entire staff in all parts of the district and these gains that we're seeing, closing the gaps. Obviously, there's still unacceptable disparities, as you said, as we all know, and that we have tons of more work to do, but just to pause a moment and thank you so much for the gains that we are seeing. So with that, I think we need to move on to our next topic, but thank you all very much. And thanks also to all the principals for being here and all that you do. So the next. All right, so the next agenda item is an update on talented and gifted. Superintendent Smith, would like to introduce this.
Yes, Melissa Goff, who's our Assistant Director of Teaching and our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, will be presenting this report.
Thank you. And I'm inviting Mark Feldman, who is the chair of our Talented and Gifted Student Advisory Council, to join me, along with Johanna Colgrove, who also serves on TAGAC. Well, hi. And we just keep growing. What I wanted to do, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk a little bit about Talented and Gifted Services. I am going to try and pull up our presentation here. Perhaps I could have someone help me pull this up. Oh, there. Oh, there we go. Magic. I don't have to touch anything. So thank you very much for the time to address the board tonight. I am having technical difficulties.
Slideshow up top.
Yeah, where am I? Thank you. All right. To get us started, what I would really like to do is start from the macro in this room and move down to the micro of the presentation. So to begin, if I could just ask, if you are a parent or a family member, or you yourself are a talented and gifted student, could you please just raise your hand, please? So I thought it was important for all of us to know that that talented and gifted students are well represented here tonight and well represented within our district as well. I also thought it was important to have us focus on the fact that not only do we have very strong families who are advocating for talented and gifted education within our district, we also have strong staff investment as well. So I did want to introduce 3 staff members who are here with me tonight. One is a new hire to PPS. I'm very proud that we've actually been able to hire a program director full-time for talented and gifted. I've worked here in PPS for 5 years, and during my tenure we have not had a full-time person on talented and gifted. So it's a very exciting addition. I'd like to welcome Andrew Johnson, who's seated in the front row here. And since Andrew just started last week, I'm going to let him sit in the front just this time.
I was going to say, you're going to let him do the whole presentation.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to introduce two of our teachers on special assignment who've been working to support teacher professional development, and that is Tessely Schulte and Kathy Daly. So tonight, what we will be sharing with you is a brief data review and policy review looking at the current school board policies that we have. Then we will have time for the Talented and Gifted Parent Advisory representatives to share specific information regarding recommendations that what we lovingly refer to as the TAGAC committee has arrived at and actually shared with this board in writing. I believe at least twice we've had that shared with you, but actually having our families be able to speak to that. And then we'll share a little bit about the alignment, where we are aligned currently, where our next steps are as well. So we're beginning with background information, and I thought it was important for us to stay rooted within the board policy. So first, with our racial educational equity policy, stating that the district shall remedy the practices, including assessment, that lead to the overrepresentation of students of color in areas such as special education and discipline, and the underrepresentation in programs such as talented and gifted and advanced placement. And it's important for us to be looking at data as we are measuring our ability to be effective in meeting the demands of that policy. So I'm going to explain this complicated graph. So this graph is tag identification by race. And on the far left, for those who are seated behind me who may not be able to read, we start with the ethnic groups moving from left to right: Asian, Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, multiple races, Native American or Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and the final group is white. So I want to explain what this graph means. This reflects the over or underrepresentation of students who have been identified as talented and gifted, and looks at that by race. So to read the graph, as an example, 71% of our talented and gifted students identify as white. 56% of PPS students identify as white. So what you do is you take the first number, subtract the second number, and that gives you a result that indicates, if it's a positive number, an overrepresentation, and if it's a negative number, an underrepresentation within the graph. So the visual here, you can see, reflects that particularly Black and Latino students are underrepresented in our talented and gifted identification. And by the same note, our white students are over-identified when you look at the numbers. So then the policy that we have existing around talented and gifted education, and this is an area where we will concur there is room for improvement in the work that we're doing around policy and administrative directives. The talented and gifted education policy we have states that the district is committed to an educational program that recognizes the unique value, needs, and talents of the individual student. Curriculum and instruction should be designed to meet the level and rate of learning of talented and gifted students and be an integral part of this commitment. So when we're looking at the effectiveness of our educational program, there are a few data points that I wanted to share with you that aligned with the priorities of the district and where the superintendent has us focusing right now. So the first is looking at third grade reading meets or exceeds. So when you look from left to right, it's the last 3 years in time frame. And we have between 97% and 99% of our talented and gifted students who are meeting or exceeding their reading benchmarks, and that's as indicated by the state assessment system. Then the next graph is taking a look at the same data that was shared with you in the former presentation, but broken out more specifically to reflect talented and gifted specifics for the 4-year cohort graduation rate, the 4-year cohort completion rate, the 5-year cohort grad rate, and the 5-year cohort completion rate. and 2011 performances on the left, and the most recent data that we have is to the right. So you can see that our 4-year cohort graduation rate for our talented and gifted students is at 91%, and our 5-year cohort completion rate for our talented and gifted students stands at 97%. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over for the next 15 minutes to our Talented and Gifted Advisory Council, and then we'll come back and cover a few more things.
Thank you. Good evening, and I also wanted to thank you for this opportunity to address you tonight. I want to let everybody else who may not have seen the recommendations know that they are available on the TAG department website. I also want to point out that the TAG Act has not had any high school members, so the recommendations that we've produced mostly apply to elementary schools and about grades K through 8. I'd like to start by thanking all the current and former TAG Act members who reviewed our draft recommendations month after month. Could TAG Act members, I think we have most of them here, raise their hand? Brenda Ray Scott, our 2012 chair, made really sure that the TAG parent survey happened. Therese Bushnell, Joanna Colgrove, and others drove developing these recommendations. Diana Ortiz Garcia is the chair of our Equity Committee, which is ramping up this year. Shelley McFarland and Nicole Iro-Zilardo co-chair our Communications Committee. Numerous parents came for a few meetings over the past few years to give us input, and we greatly benefited from discussions with several teachers along the way as well. I know that our members are very encouraged by the recent investment in hiring a full-time TAG administrator with a strong TAG background. So thank you, Superintendent Smith, for letting that happen, and to Melissa for making that happen. During the void, we really appreciated Tony Hunter's honesty and responsiveness as our interim TAG administrator. We also appreciate Melissa Goff's openness to discussing our recommendations, even though we know we don't see eye to eye on all of them. I think we have two things that we want to persuade you of tonight: that there are serious ongoing issues and that our recommendations are reasonable. The former may come across somewhat negatively at times, but I want to assure you that we do aspire to be a team-oriented advisory, to have a team-oriented advisory relationship, and we do want to constructively support our school district.
So when we started putting together this presentation, we thought it was really important to speak to what our values were in what we wanted and looking at what strong TAG services meant, but also that not just TAG students, because clearly there's problems with identification, but all students deserve challenging education. We need equity where all kids get what they need without requiring heroic parental involvement. It should not be dependent on parents to advocate for their kids to get them the challenges that they need. And we want to simplify the system for the benefit of teachers, the school district, and mostly the students and the parents. Some of our considerations when we thought about what would be plausible, realistic, we wanted to make it as budget neutral as possible. I'm sorry, I can't actually read with my glasses on. If students are being regularly assessed, we should be using those assessments to place them appropriately, not just know, oh yeah, they're smart, then what? We have some great teachers in PPS. We need to make it easier for them to do their jobs, not require heroic effort from them to differentiate for 30 students. Heroic effort is not a sustainable model for anyone. It leads to burnout for both teachers and parents, and the district. We also don't want pullouts. We don't think pullouts are education. They're a special one-off. It's like dessert. It's not the meal. And the other thing is there's some relevant Oregon law, PPS policy, driving this, that students should be met at their rate and level. They should be served well, and we really want to see this happen. I'm going to hand it back to Mark.
Okay. Are you doing the next slide?
Yes, if you want. is your slide.
Oh, okay. I have to say it was really hard sitting here through the previous presentations, hearing about the stellar graduation rates of TAG students and how well they're doing on the test scores, knowing that I was going to have to come here and present this slide, which basically says the district is failing TAG students. But the goals that we're trying to see met are those set by the board, and they're also set by state lawmakers. So I think the expectation of meeting them is reasonable. It's probably worth additional discussion at some point as to how these two situations can legitimately coexist at the same time. But the results of a 2012 parent tag survey did show widespread dissatisfaction, and therefore we think evidence that the goals are not being met. Of course, there were differences among schools, but the only real exception was the alternative education program, Access Academy. Access's survey responses were reversed across the board. Let me read two of the issues that were highlighted in the survey. 85% of district parents with an opinion disagreed, and 58% of Access parents agreed that the level of TAG services their child receives is consistent and does not depend on who their teacher is. 83% of district parents disagreed, and 89% of Access parents agreed that TAG services have improved their children's academic achievement. The results really scream out that district-wide TAG students don't feel they're being supported well, at least their parents don't. We believe that Access offers an important example of what PPS could become by adopting some of the practices there district-wide. One of the only things we can point out as a real kind of TAG service is single subject acceleration. This is when a student who has mastered the grade level curriculum goes on to a higher grade level to study that subject every day. We believe that a small number of students do this every year, although we can't get a real count of how many. But even SSA is not serving students well because documentation about how it works has historically been unavailable and recently has been on and off depending on who the TAG administrator was. Parents who have tried it report that principals and others deny or strongly discourage it. We also believe that its 99% test requirement can put a valuable practice out of reach of many students who could benefit. Lake Oswego School District, for example, supports acceleration of students achieving 80% grade level, mastery of grade level material. As an unintended consequence of rate and level not being met, one unintended consequence may be that TAG families disproportionately use the lottery and petition process to search for better instruction or something to replace it. A SACIT analysis concluded that only 11% of K-8 lottery applications were TAG identified, but focus and immersion schools admit by lottery in kindergarten. That's before the district-wide TAG testing in second grade. If instead you look at only middle school lottery applications after TAG identification, you see 22% are tagged compared with 18% TAG students at all middle schools. It's possible the difference is even greater for elementary schools where 3 times as many students are using the lottery than at middle schools. SACIT also pointed out that above and beyond the lottery, even more TAG students use the petition process. And then, of course, there's Access's wait list, which is 100% TAG students searching for services. These patterns suggest that our recommendations could help retain TAG students in neighborhood schools. In fact, since almost nothing we are suggesting depends on TAG identification, they could be a concrete way to strengthen academic programs in general. As we understand it, PPS's solution for meeting rate and level is that all teachers should differentiate for all students in all subjects. But our survey said that 63% disagreed that their child's teacher makes adjustments to instruction and assignments. This was even though 55% agreed that the classroom teacher understands the needs of gifted students. That was kind of strange. In person, parents kept telling us that despite good intentions and tag plans, differentiation just wasn't working in math and often in reading. The articles in the meeting materials show that there was quite a debate among educators about whether differentiation actually works. Both sides do seem to agree that differentiation is really hard. We came to believe that the range of achievement levels in classrooms is just too wide to allow consistent differentiation. We're not saying it can't work, but we do believe that it needs to be combined with other practices that narrow or distribute the range of achievement levels while maintaining a heterogeneous classroom. I urge you to read about the Pitney Branch Elementary School in the All Together Now article. It tells how the principal there used differentiation successfully, even while balancing academic growth and high diversity. The secret, they used additional practices, some very similar to those that we're recommending. We think that our recommendations describe a set of suitable tools that will give teachers a fighting chance to successfully differentiate. So TAGAC is well aware of the underidentification of gifted students of color and generally at schools serving lower income communities. I've personally gone through data on this school by school, and it's pretty clear that something's wrong. Our recommendations request additional statistics related to this. I hope a year from now, our equity committee will have additional recommendations addressing these issues. But some things are obvious now. Consider this comment from the survey. Giving additional homework fails to appreciate how excruciatingly hard the easy work seems to a TAG student. Answering the same easy questions over and over feels like torture. I can tell you from personal experience that a bored student can quickly become a misbehaving student. Using rate and level to eliminate the boredom is the solution, but it can be many referrals and many stressed parent meetings before it's clear that boredom is the cause, or a cause. Single subject acceleration may look like a solution, but confrontational meetings about this can go on for a year, and parents must provide transportation to middle school and 5th grade. I just can't imagine how a family without a stay-at-home parent could manage anywhere near this kind of heroic advocacy. Another issue is that when access stops growing in 2016, about 1 in 5 openings will be available before district-wide tag testing. These slots will only be available to in-the-know parents who realize the need to ask for testing in kindergarten or can afford to have it done, have outside testing done. Finally, Margaret DeLacy has examined year-to-year academic gains of TAG students. Compared to district averages, she's found a much bigger difference for low-income, Hispanic, and African American students among the students that exceed than among low-scoring students. We don't understand this well yet, but we want to continue to track it.
I get to talk about the positive stuff. So, some themes for the improvements that we looked at. We wanted concrete, effective tag services for all neighborhood schools. My son goes to a neighborhood school. He has for his entire career. He's now in 7th grade. This will be too late for him, really. But it still is very important. We need to adopt some best practices. We need to, if differentiation requires heroic effort on the part of a teacher or the part of parents, it's not sustainable. So we need something else. To be very clear, these recommendations are just a starting point. They are not the final answer. But hopefully they can make things better and reduce the amount of heroism required. Transparency is a big first start in making things better. Easing equity concerns. If we have clear policies guiding what we do, then it's available to everybody as opposed to just those parents who know the right person, who knows the right person. We need to keep looking for better methodology. PPS goals are good, but the methods need more work, I think. And we want to make differentiation possible by not insisting on the widest possible range in a classroom, grouping kids solely by chronological age. We long ago gave up on one-room schoolrooms, which would be the widest possible range. They're not an effective way of educating our students. So we want to make sure the classrooms stay heterogeneous. The research is good. But there can be fewer levels. We don't have to have the absolute widest span. We need to find solutions that don't require tracking, because everybody runs away from that notion, and for many good reasons. But we need to have answers that are driven by the student achievement, not by parents advocating for them. So here are our recommendations boiled down. We want to place elementary and middle school students in the appropriate level math and reading classes. And I'm going to go into more of these in more detail as we go. We want to reform the screening for single subject acceleration. This year, as far as we can tell from district, 30 students were evaluated. 1 student was accelerated. The amount of resources that took for 30 students doesn't really multiply well for 48,000 students in terms of figuring out there's got to be a better way to tell what students need to be accelerated. And it shouldn't be so scary to accelerate a student by a single year. If they take 4th grade math as a 3rd grader and they don't do well, they can take 4th grade math as a 4th grader and be fine. It shouldn't be so scary. We need to use flexible grouping to narrow the range in classes. There are a whole variety of models out there that are showing a lot of success. We need to be looking at those and finding better ways to do what we do. Eliminate and repurpose the PEG budget. I'm not going to talk about too much. The district is working on this already. We should be providing centralized resources. We're not talking about pullouts. It hasn't been used effectively across the district. It's not equitable. There's got to be better ways to use that money, and we shouldn't be fighting over pennies. Access Academy. I'm going to touch on this only briefly. The Access Academy serves some TAG students, but last year there were 200 qualified students on the wait list. It should be able to be big enough to accept all qualified students, or maybe a second school. And the last recommendation we've talked a lot about already, that we need better data. We need to understand, if we accelerate students, are they being successful? Is that working long term for them? Is it not working for them? What programs can we be using to help these kids and all kids be successful and not just reach their benchmarks, but excel? It's great that high school students are meeting benchmarks, TAG students are meeting benchmarks, but they should be way ahead, and we don't even know how far they are ahead or whether we're getting them where they need to be. Okay, so here is our proposed model of measures 1 through 3. These work together, so it's important to sort of understand what we're doing here. So I'm going to try and make it clear, wave at me if I'm not making sense. Currently, my understanding is that all students are evaluated at the beginning of the year to see where they are. And then the teachers are supposed to use that in the classroom. So we think that particularly in math and reading, those evaluations should be used to place the kids appropriately in the right level of math and reading class. So if they are in 4th grade and they can manage all of the 4th grade curriculum already in August, and they've got it mastered, they shouldn't have to do 4th grade math again. They should get to move on. We think an 80% score is reasonable. I've had some people be like, really? 80%? That seems really high, or really low. But if you think about what's a passing grade, 80% is still well above passing for the end of a year assessment. So it's not such an unreasonable number. And we really think that if it's 1 grade acceleration, that needs to stay in the school. The school should be able to manage that without the district evaluation, because otherwise it just becomes too much of a burden for the district. And if it's a burden for the district, then it's a burden for the school, and it slows everything down. And then beyond that, for kids who test at 99 percentile, then you do some more evaluation to see whether they're really TAG, and you look at whether or not Access is the right option for them. So once you get that assessment, particularly for math and reading, you place them in the right classrooms. So that's the start. We're meeting their level of learning. Okay, all with me? So, students study at their level. The benefits of acceleration are well documented. There is a lot of research out there. Sorry, I lost my place there for a second. And we want to emphasize really that this model is driven by student achievement, not by parental advocacy. It should be based on what the students are achieving in the classroom, so that the students who are achieving regardless of gender, regardless of skin color, regardless of cultural background, if they have this content mastered, they should be moving on. This slide was, we had all sorts of problems. I had a slide of text that went with this, and somehow electronic transport back and forth, it disappeared into the vortex. So this is an example of flexible ability grouping. There are several different kinds of grouping that different schools are doing. There are things called cluster grouping, there's flexible ability grouping, so I'm going to try and get the commonalities of that. And the idea is that you get much more intentional about how you assign students into classrooms. You don't go for the widest spread. So for example, in this model that we have here, this could be used for a classroom grade level. So we have 2 classes in 3rd grade. And we take that whole student population. And the current model is that you would take that whole range of abilities and you would try to divide it as evenly as possible between those teachers. So if you have 4 kids at the top of the range, you can put 2 in each classroom. And if you have 4 kids at the bottom, you put 2 in each classroom, so that every teacher has the maximum range. The ability group classroom is still keeping that idea that you want a range, but instead, if you divided it into 6 buckets, you take 1 teacher gets buckets 1, 3, and 5, and 1 gets 2, 4, and 6, and suddenly you have a classroom that's a little bit narrower, it's a little bit more focused. You have tag students who are grouped together, so there's some synergy there. You have students who are at the bottom who are grouped together, who are not, I'm not the only person who doesn't get this. You have students in your second group who are now maybe the smartest people, and it's not always the tag kids who are dominating. There's some really good research out there. There's an article that we included in the packet explaining this more in detail. But it really serves the needs of the students of more focused teacher time. It simplifies the life of the teacher. I've been talking to a bunch of teachers about this, and they're like, that makes total sense. It would make my life easier. And if we make the teachers' lives easier, they can teach better.
And apologies for interrupting, but just to point out, we are over time for this entire presentation, so maybe we could wrap up.
I am actually almost done, because I think that's my last slide. So Mark's going to make the...
Okay, and this is the last, our request slide is the last slide. We know that some of our recommendations clearly need to be reviewed carefully by PPS educators, but I think single subject acceleration is an exception. In 2010, the TAG administrator created an administrative directive discussing a framework for math that would be available to any qualified student. The chief academic officer at the time, Carla Randall, signed the framework. Acceleration is already a de facto policy. It's been used successfully at Odyssey for many years. It was used. Access Academy accelerates over 75% of its students 1 or more grades in math. And students are already occasionally accelerated at neighborhood elementary and middle schools. Despite all this, parents continue to have problems requesting an evaluation for this. And we were recently told by the TAG department, this is not a policy. So we would like to request that you adopt a policy. It should be formalized. It's happening, it's de facto. We're just asking for what everybody pretty much expects should already be there. The TAG survey, the TAG parent survey clearly showed that something special was happening at Access Academy, yet their growth will soon be limited, much smaller than an average K-8. We'd like to request that you ask DBRAC to find a permanent location where Access can expand to admit all qualified students. Finally, we greatly desire the opportunity to further promote the grouping models that Johanna has discussed with educators here at BSC and in schools. We look forward to continuing the conversation about implementing our recommendations. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, so I want to acknowledge what Mr. Feldman said about this being a really healthy advisory and advocacy relationship. The TAGAC team has been deeply engaged and respectfully engaged and has already, their advocacy has already led to some changes within the system. And as he also said, we still share, we have some differences still in how to best serve our students, and we're continuing conversations in those areas. So I did want to share a few things with you. One is the system improvements that we've made this year. So one, I introduced Mr. Johnson earlier, who's our full-time TAG program manager, and our teachers on special assignment who are here tonight as well. As was mentioned by Johanna, we have centralized our talented and gifted budgets because it was brought to our attention that there was really concerning underspending at some points, and what we've seen is that schools have been better accessing talented and gifted funds since we've centralized the dollars. We've also shifted our professional development approach to address the pieces that you heard tonight, which is every student, every classroom needs to be meeting the needs of our talented and gifted students. And in order to do that, teachers need professional development around both creating a rigorous classroom and a relevant classroom. So we've embedded that across all of the professional development that we provide from PPS staff. And then we also have been reviewing the identification system through our equity lens. Where we are in English language arts, we currently have a literacy assessment committee that's taking a look at the current assessments that we're using and the efficacy of those assessments in identifying student strengths and opportunities for improvement, and also informing teachers as to appropriate next steps to support students. We have a PK through 12 literacy adoption process currently underway. The board partially funded that last year, and those dollars are still in process this year. And then we also are looking at how we improve our literacy reporting for teacher use, which was one of the pieces that you also heard. Our students and families and teachers need to better understand where our students are performing in their literacy skills. And we've been providing professional development, specifically in flexible grouping. In the area of mathematics, we've been budgeting for the purchase of extension materials aligned to elementary standards and bridges curriculum. So you will see that coming forth in the budget that will be for the 15-16 school year. We also have compacted math pathways to create multiple entry points for accelerated rate of learning at the middle school level. I would also say that we do have in place single subject acceleration, and one of our shared areas of concern is lack of understanding within the system and with our families on how to access that component. For next steps, we want to review TAG identification processes and acceleration board policies and the administrative directives through an equity lens. One of the areas that we have room for improvement in is making sure that those things that we believe are most important in serving our talented and gifted students get reflected in our administrative directives. We also are preparing to review and procure digital learning resources to support differences in rate and level of learning so that we can differentiate within the classroom for students and help relieve some of the tension that a large range of student learning paces creates for teachers who are still learning themselves how to differentiate within that model. And then we're working with systems planning and performance around the current reporting of talented and gifted data and potential improvements. And those reports range from reports that go to families, but also reports that would be residing on the school websites. And so I know that we are over time tonight, but we are happy to together answer questions that you may have.
Great, thank you so much. Board members, questions, comments? Director Bull, you want to start this time? I see just one line on your notepad.
But I didn't write down one of the questions, the first one. But if we've got 3 classrooms at school A in the 4th grade, so do we have anything new that we're actually going to do with the teachers or with the situation or anything with those 3 teachers in those classrooms that is going to allow them or going to get them to do a better job around working with TAG children in their classes? Because one of the things that I see is you never talk to a teacher that wouldn't want to do that, but you can talk to 10,000 teachers who say, I'm exhausted. I mean, we've got them so pushed down that it's very hard to do, and I'm not making an excuse. I'm just saying, are we addressing that in any way, or what do we got going next year? If my kid's now, he was in the 3rd grade, didn't get much. Now it's 4th grade. What do I got in that 4th grade class that he's going to get now that he didn't, or she?
So what I would say the biggest shift has been is in our professional development approach over the course of the last year. So we have really shifted as a system to look at the national framework around providing rigor and relevance to the classroom. And the rigor component really is helping teachers see what kinds of questions move to a depth of complexity so that students are challenged within the classroom. And that professional development we've embedded in whatever professional development we're offering. So for our math professional development or our science professional development, that's embedded now in those PD pieces.
Are you speaking of the Common Core? We're going to use can we talk about the new, we've got professional development about increasing questioning, but I don't know about anybody else out here, but if I had a TAG student, it'd be nice if he questioned. I want to know what curricular things that child would be getting. More questioning from the teacher doing a better job doesn't really wouldn't really get it done for me, I guess. I mean, are we talking Common Core and that's supposed to help the TAG situation? It seems to me like maybe I don't know what you're saying, Melissa, because it seems to me like the Common Core is making it harder to differentiate, not easier, because we're pushing that, and it's creating some problems for TAG kids as well as for kids who are struggling, trying to learn to read and all those types of things.
So as you know, the Common Core are the adopted state standards in only literacy, which is English, language arts, and mathematics.
Yeah.
So across the entire spectrum of courses and subjects that are taught to students, we are expecting teachers to develop the skill set of being able to have varying levels of rigor within the classroom, and we're training them around how to do that. So the questioning, I'm not referring to a questioning technique from a standards. I'm talking about the approach.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Thanks. So,
Can I add something to the
really
response?
quickly, yeah, thanks.
But one of our points is, with all due respect, that the research says that no matter how much professional development you give teachers on how to do differentiation, it's still too hard when the range is that wide.
Yeah.
There's a teacher has a limited amount of prep time to prepare for each of the groups, right? And if you've got fewer groups with more kids in each group, he or she can do a better job differentiating for each group.
Right. So Director Blau.
First, I want to say thank you for this presentation. For as long as I've been in PPS, I've heard of disappointment in TAG services. Again, we oftentimes attribute it to funding, and there are still things we can be doing to be getting better services to students, so I appreciate that. And I do appreciate, originally your recommendation was to reapportion or repurpose school budgets for TAG, and I appreciate the centralization and beginning to be systematic with that about how do we use that investment. Because I heard everything from, we fund a field trip to someplace to, oh, whoops, there it went. Forgot we were supposed to spend it. Right. So I appreciate your efforts. There are a couple of things, and you don't need to answer these, or we don't need a back and forth, but I just offer these as food for thought, because these were processes that went through my head, and these will feel a little bit more, not antagonistic, but challenging to some of the ideas. Like when I hear things like, if a student is accelerated to 4th grade math, and then they don't succeed in 4th grade math, they have 4th grade then when they're there to figure it out. That's true unless the reason they didn't succeed in 4th grade math is that they missed a 3rd grade skill set, and they missed it because, so now you have a 4th grade teacher who needs to go back and teach that 4th grade or 3rd grade. Do you see what I mean? That it sounds reasonable until we get into some of the details. The second one that stuck out to me like that was the recommendation to assign students. They assess at the beginning of the year, assign students to the classes. That means students come in and that's not really going to be their class. Then we do a big shuffle, say in October, to get them in the right classes, which is a transition. And if I begin to look at my equity lens about the instability that creates, my guess is certain students will fare well with that system, and certain students may not fare well with starting school in September and then entirely shifting classes once they get assigned to their proper level. So it could be just an easy switch to spring, but I believe, from my understanding, as my kids are going through, teachers do sit around a table and they say, okay, where does this make sense? And that brings me to the other point, is that this is really focused on academics. And the experience I've had, and I've really appreciated about all the teachers that I've experienced, is that they're balancing multiple factors. It's not just academics, but it's behavior. It's about what social aspects, it's about maturity, it's about a number of different things. So I caution us as we, again, just look at assessment and student achievement data. And that goes along with the reducing it to 80%. Again, is if I look through with an equity lens, my worry is that our current form of identifying students is disproportionate. Using that same identification and just dropping it down to 80%, I bet, will even perhaps increase our disproportionality, if not, it definitely won't accommodate for it. I'll stop there in case somebody wants to reply, so I don't just ramble on.
Just a short reply to that is that in our actual recommendation about doing this, we say that there's really no tag identification necessary, right? The teacher, they're evaluated at the beginning of the year, students just like they would normally be, and teachers can use that result. They can use their judgment about whether the child works hard and didn't quite make it, or whether they have other issues, even though they've achieved 99% and they shouldn't. So
it creates a shifting at the beginning of the year, whether it's tag or not.
Yeah.
And that finally on that one is talking about buckets 1 through 6. It kind of implies that students are in this bucket for all
It's a
subjects.
very oversimplification,
Right.
because of the amount of time we had.
And I appreciate that. And I just say that we can see how complex it gets really.
Yes.
They're moving for this class, they're moving for that class, and as the state's looking at instructional hours, how do you do that effectively? So I'm not dismissing the idea, but just wanted to acknowledge that it feels.
But I would like to answer your first point of worrying about this disruption of getting moved, as opposed to the dissatisfaction, boredom from kids who aren't moved.
Sure, that's an unacceptable option. I'm just saying that I'm not sure that solution gets to it, right? So now, to you, Ms. Goff, some questions, and I know Ms. Director Atkins were low on time. You had brought up middle school compacted math, and I've heard a lot of folks talk about there's new math in middle school. Common Core or our adoption does not spiral like it used to, so you can't go back and revisit or reteach as much as you could. Perhaps it does in some cases. How are we addressing that? And I don't think I understand middle school, because I really have heard parents say, well, my student can't learn, like they've already mastered this level, they want to move on, but we're told we can only teach this, or that I'm told that they can only teach 6th grade concepts or 8th grade you know what I mean? They can't move ahead to their next level.
Yeah. Yes, so, great question, and I actually asked the Assistant Director of Instruction, Curriculum, and Assessment, Julie Ryerson, to be here specifically if we had a compacted math question.
Bingo, bingo.
I have a kid doing it right now. I mean, it's for kids who learn at a faster level, so a greater rate. So they're doing 7th and 8th grade
I'm
math
not disagreeing with
one
it.
year.
I've just heard parents say that they've been instructed from staff that they can't move ahead to a 7th or an 8th grade level if they're at 6th grade or vice versa. And I'm wondering, why is that perception in our staff? And thank you for being here. Look, I asked the one
Hi.
question to keep you here until 9:30.
So, to begin with, I think I'll start with the 6th grade. So when we, a couple years ago, made this shift as we were transitioning with Common Core, we took a look at what research was saying around heterogeneous math instruction. And recommendations were to actually hold off to the end of 7th grade before making that decision. And so we wrestled with that as a district, and we also worked across the state with other regional TOSAs and with specialists from ODE to address that question of when is the best time to start doing that acceleration. So we landed on, and many districts across the state landed on 6th grade. Let's keep that heterogeneous. Let's really work with our teachers around differentiation so that we're working on depth and complexity and building deep conceptual understanding, because that is a critical point in terms of introducing variable, introducing ratio and proportional reasoning, and we know that down the road how important those were going to be. So the compacted math then came in for a 7th and 8th grade option. So still wanting to provide an opportunity for students to accelerate in middle school. And so students are then placed based on 3 data points into either a compacted math pathway or into Math 7 and Math 8, which, as you know, with Common Core in the transition, almost 50% of what was in high school now sat in 4th grade through 8th grade, but mostly in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So students, even in Math 7 and Math 8, were getting a much more rigorous math curriculum. So our students in compacted, that identify for compacted, they actually complete. So someone mentioned the spiraling of the curriculum. Because the Common Core does not spiral, it's really critical for students to not skip standards, which is what our past practice was in this district. So students had severe gaps, and what we saw and what our data told us is that students were not completing advanced math in their senior year. Even if they were accelerated in middle school, 46% of them by 12th grade were not taking advanced math courses anymore, which is concerning because we know when they don't take a math course in 12th grade what that means. So back to compacted. So students in a compacted 7th and 8th grade course cover 3 full years of standards in 2 years. So they cover all of the 7th grade standards, all of the 8th grade standards, all of the algebra standards. They can earn high school credit for algebra, and then move on into high school, which is where we offer our other opportunities for acceleration in mathematics.
So I'm going to ask that we thank you very much for that, but I am asked that we move on. Do we have other questions or comments about this presentation?
It's all right.
Mina, did you have anything?
I guess the only thing was looking at these graphs that you guys had where you would split students into different classrooms, just thinking about who would be in these different parts of the graphs, and just looking at like equity in that way, who exactly is represented in the middle graph and who's on the outside graphs, and just, yeah, that's like my only concern I had looking at this.
Okay, Director Buell, I think we need to move on because it's
Speed
quarter till
chess tonight?
10. Pardon?
Is speed chess tonight?
No, it's
confused.
quarter
I
to
have
10, and
one
I'd like to
other
make sure
question.
that we have sufficient time to cover our third and final. You had a follow-up question about that. Maybe you could do that by email. I'd also like to make a comment, which I haven't. been able to do.
Okay, but I really take umbrage to the fact that I have a question that I can't ask to a presentation that they bring forward on something like
Well, why
tag,
don't
I
you
take
just
them.
ask it very quickly and then we
Well,
can wrap
no.
up?
No, just go ahead.
Okay.
You've already made your decision, that's fine.
Okay, great.
Great
So-
question, too.
Great. I just offered you if you wanted to ask it
Okay, I'll
rather than
ask it.
complain about not
One
asking.
kid was accelerated, that was what you had said, Mark?
That's what we know of.
One kid in the whole school system?
Yep.
In all of Portland Public
One
Schools?
new acceleration.
Was what?
One new acceleration where they hadn't been accelerated in previous
This
years.
last year?
This last fall.
And I would add to that that must be single subject acceleration
Yes.
because the compacted math pathway is a form of acceleration.
Okay.
So we
Yeah,
have
right,
certainly
right.
a lot
What
of
about-
students who are doing
Was
that.
it literacy you were talking about?
Math.
Reading?
I believe it was in math, but I don't know.
Previous to the acceleration from the 7th to the 8th grade? There was
Yes,
only
this
one
was
that
in
was,
elementary
okay,
school.
fine. Thank you.
As far as we know, it's just elementary, but I think it's also an issue of nobody is keeping really records of this, so I'm not sure how accurate even this one is. We've been told they just don't know.
Yeah, I would actually like to speak to that and to second what Mark said.
Didn't ask for
In
that.
following up on that data, the teacher who had provided that information simply had her hands on a single student, and that was her reference point, is the single student she had herself worked with. When we look to see where can we find the data around single subject acceleration, what we discovered is we are not housing that centrally, and we need to start keeping that centrally so that we're
Can you
paying
just send an
attention to that.
email out to every principal and have them send back how many kids were accelerated this year in your school in math? I mean, that'd take about what? They'd have to walk down and ask somebody, or they'd have to ask a question at the faculty meeting? Couldn't we just do it that way and find out?
There are many ways we could do that.
So I think I'm just going to wrap up and say that I would appreciate, thank you very much for your presentation. I think we heard some of sort of the crosswalk, Melissa, from what you're doing to the TAG Act recommendations, but I think for me it'd be helpful maybe in a written follow-up just to make sure what your response is to each one of them specifically, so we can know where you are. It sounds like you are doing some maybe you have a different view of how to go about them. So for me, it would be helpful just to kind of have that follow-up. I'd appreciate that very much. So that things like when are we going to do that policy review so that we are clear across the district.
And we are coming back to you in the fall for a staff report around talented and gifted. The focus
Okay.
for tonight was really to make sure that the TAG Act recommendations were
Great.
shared.
So Dr. Newell
just-
says she has one tiny question.
Just one quick question, and that has to do with, because we're considering all this. I'm assuming there are some budget ramifications in some of these suggestions, and we're going to see something along that line? We have budget issues here?
I think we've tried not to suggest anything that clearly costs large, huge amounts of money. But, we are asking that, for example, all schools are able to support one grade of acceleration above their maximum grade. And clearly that's not free, but we're hoping that that could be done with itinerant teachers or
Right.
additional help by teachers there using
I was looking
technology or
more
something.
at the potential for a lot of professional development for our teachers to do some of this work.
Yes.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, you'll see
some
budget
issues around that.
You'll see budget issues coming forth with the superintendent.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
And
much.
thank you very much.
Thank you to the
For
entire
all the
team
hard
and
work.
the advisory committee.
You bet.
So I'm not calling a recess, but I do suggest we have a 7th inning stretch so we can give this next topic its due with a little more energy. Let's do a stand up and a stretch.
Guy who came and showed us that.
Oh, I know.
Go Noodle?
Yeah.
Is that what it was? Called Go Noodle?
Yeah.
So we have one more important topic on our agenda tonight, and that is an update on our equity implementation plan. It's important, but it's not an informational update. All right. So can the equity team come on down? Yeah, that was just a quick stretch. So, with our revitalized blood flow here and energy, we are very pleased to have as our final major topic tonight an update on our equity implementation plan. This topic is listed on the board's priority work plan for semi-annual updates to the board, and this is our second update this year, so we're really pleased to see you back. Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce the item? And can folks out in the hallway please keep your voices down so we can move on to the next topic? Thank you so much.
Yes, as Chair Atkins just described, this is our semi-annual update, and Lorenzo Poe, who is our Chief Equity and Diversity Officer and Director of Partnerships, and Janine Fukuda, who is Assistant Director of the same department, will be presenting our report this evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Lorenzo Poe, Chief Equity and Diversity Officer and Director of Partnerships, Board Member Superintendent Smith. Let me do two things. One, in the spirits of helping all of us catch up on time and have a significant amount of time for questions and answers, because that seems to be really critical. And because part of our presentation that we have a teacher, and we wanted to make sure that we had enough time for her to be a part of the presentation and get out, to get back home, to get rest, to be in class tomorrow. So let me do this quickly and say that this is the update of our annual racial equity plan. It is the plan that contains the critical strategies, the metrics, and the accountability models by which we're looking at how we're in fact moving and progressing with implementation of your racial equity plan. We also want to spend a few minutes tonight to talk about the key performance indicators. Those are the high-level indicators and strategies that we have identified that will serve as that flashpoint for us to see from a high level as if we're moving toward the direction of closing the gap as we've described in it. And lastly, we want to bring before you the Collaborative Action Research for Equity Group, our CARES model, and allow them to talk to you about, in some detail in the briefing, about what we're doing in CARES work. Because one of the things that I'm constantly asked is how are we moving the work into the classroom? Where is this work touching teachers and impacting their work? And it is through the CARES model, so we did want to make sure we give them opportunity to brief you and you become familiar with that. So with that, let me turn it over to Janine and let her walk you through our equity plan, our key performance indicators, and then we'll bring up our CARES team. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening. Janine Fukuda, Assistant Director in the Office of Equity and Partnerships. As Superintendent Smith mentioned, in June 2011, we passed our Racial Educational Equity Policy. This policy directs the superintendent to develop annual equity plans with clear accountability and metrics, and to provide semi-annual updates to the board. I'm going to briefly just go over the information in your packets before turning it over to my colleagues. In your packet, you will find two plan documents. The first is the 2013-2014 Annual Equity Plan Year-End Progress Report, which summarizes some of the district's key equity goals for the year and our progress towards those goals. Also in your packet is the 2014-2015, that's this school year, Annual Equity Plan, which documents key equity work that's currently underway. You will notice that this year's equity plan includes a focus on the superintendent's 3 priorities. So we are in the process of integrating the superintendent's 3 priority work along with our Males of Color Pledge work into the equity plan. And so in future iterations, you'll start to see that integration more clearly. Also in your packets are our equity key performance indicators, or KPIs. While our milestones are the ultimate measure of success of our equity work, the KPIs measure system-level progress towards closing racial opportunity gaps, which contribute to disparities in student achievement. And thank you, Melissa Goff, for earlier in the evening sort of walking us through how those KPIs are calculated. So you'll see that the KPIs are generally trending in a positive direction. I just wanted to point out some key highlights. The October 2014 special education data is still being compiled. However, preliminary results indicate that the overall number of Black students who qualify for special education services dropped from 1,043 to 975 this year. Black students who qualify under emotional disturbance decreased in number from 120 to 111. And Black students who qualify under intellectual disability decreased in number from 56 to 48. With our AP IB dual credit KPI, in 2013-14, year over year, there was a 40% increase in the number of black students enrolled in AP, IB, or dual credit courses, where 98 more black students were enrolled.
What percentage? What percentage, I'm sorry?
40%, 40% increase year over year. Sorry, I don't have slides, but I can.
Keep going, you're doing great.
For Hispanic Latino students, there was a 17% increase with 71 more students enrolled. And for our Native American Alaskan Native students, there was an increase of 13% with 4 more students enrolled. This was due to intentional outreach efforts and an expansion of the Academic Scholars Program at Franklin to Roosevelt. Our teacher diversity numbers continue to improve as well. For the 2014-15 school year, of the 501 new teachers hired, 21% were teachers of color. Over the past 5 years, the percentage of teachers of color in the district has increased from 13% to 18%. So we will not be walking through all of the documents that are in your packet tonight. The equity work has become embedded in all of the work that we do, and so a lot of the work in the plan should be familiar to you, and you'll be seeing more of it in all of the presentations that come forward. For example, tonight you heard about the tag work and the high school graduation work. Next week we'll be doing a much deeper dive on the exclusionary discipline work. With that quick overview, I'm going to hand this over to our colleagues who are going to now talk about the care work, and we'll take questions at the end.
Great, just a quick point of clarification, the data are in the board packet that's been posted
Yes.
online, so if folks want to see the data you've been referencing, it's online.
Yes.
In the packet for tonight's meeting. Great, thank you. And there should be paper copies up there as well.
Over here, too.
Yeah. Sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
Good evening, Good evening, directors.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Regina Sackrider, and I'm Program Director for Equity Care.
And my name is Cynthia McLeod, and I'm the Assistant Director of Equity Professional Development.
And tonight we're going to talk about CARE, which is the instructional component of the district's equity work. And CARE stands for Collaborative Action Research for Equity. And before we begin our presentation, what we'd like to do is introduce Misty Koenig, who is a teacher from Madison High School, and she's going to talk about how the CARE process has impacted her work as a teacher and her students of color in her classroom. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Misty Koenig, and I work at Madison High School. So this is my 5th year of teaching at Madison High School, and my 2nd year being a member of the CARE team. In that time I have been at Madison, I've taken part in multiple forms of professional development, and I believe that CARE has been the most important one in tackling the issues of closing the achievement gap with students of color. I can honestly say that CARE has opened my eyes when it comes to my daily lesson plans. I look at my classes and my students, specifically my students of color, with a very different lens. Most of the time, lesson planning involves thinking strictly about content, and very rarely do we think about a student's perspective when we plan. And through my work with CARE, I've learned to create lessons for my students instead of fitting my students into the lessons that I've already created. And what I've discovered is that when I focus on 1 or 2 students of color and their specific needs, the end result benefits the entire class. Had it not been for my work through this program, I never would have looked at creating lessons through this specific lens of diversity. CARE has also given me the opportunity to collaborate with a small group of colleagues in regards to students of color and their learning. And within that group, we tackle issues that all of us have but don't know how to necessarily deal with. We focus on what we as teachers need to change in order to really help our students of color, instead of thinking about how our students need to change to fit into our model that we already have. While this has been extremely challenging at times, it has been something that has altered my way of thinking as an educator. Too often we focus on the external issues within our classrooms rather than turning the mirror inward. Through CARE, I've been challenged to do this often. I am challenged to look at myself, to look at my planning, to look at all things that I might have dismissed before, all with the hopes of benefiting the students within my classroom. Additionally, I'm able to observe and be observed by other teachers and get intentional feedback on engaging and interacting with students of color. Without CARE, I know I wouldn't be making changes to better my practice like I am now, simply because I wouldn't have the voices and the eyes in my classroom pushing me to do so, which is such a rare commodity in our profession right now. I'm not sure what other districts have teachers observing each other for the sole purpose of equity, and I feel privileged to be given that opportunity to do so. And finally, I think if we're ever going to be able to manage this issue of equity within our schools, we have to be intentional with our actions. We have to back up our desire to tackle this topic with our solid professional development. We can't just simply say we want to change and not implement anything that's going to promote that change. And CARE is an integral part of closing the achievement gap, and I'm honored to be a part of it, and I only hope I can continue to grow as a professional by being pushed in ways that wouldn't have happened had it not been for this program.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thank you. Do you have any questions at this time?
Okay, board members.
For Misty?
Misty wants to go home.
Yeah. Misty has to go to school early in the morning.
Yes, please.
What subject did you say?
I teach math, geometry specifically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
So great to have
Thank
you
you
here.
for your comments.
So, Director Blau.
First, I just want to say, if you haven't seen the Madison video, go check it out, go mad, because it's awesome, and thank you for being here, and I appreciate. One of my colleagues often categorizes teachers into 3 buckets, and I won't go into those 3 buckets, but they're quite commonly in many professions, there are certain people who are really interested in and have the capacity to take critical feedback and improve their profession. And there are other folks who take it as a criticism and they shy away from that. So can you talk about, especially in a profession that has traditionally been the expert in the room, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing at Madison to open up to, because it's scary having somebody else come in and give you critical feedback saying you're not doing this or you are doing this. You might be more receptive to it, but I'm sure that we have some folks who maybe aren't as receptive or open to that. So can you talk about, 1, how do you set that tone, and then 2, and I don't know if it's you crew or if it's through our other academic staff, how do we follow up with teachers who aren't making the progress that we need them to connect with all their students?
Sure. First, I think that the most important thing is getting teachers who are willing and wanting to be a part of this work to be a part of it, and not pushing everyone to be a part of it when you're not ready, because then you get that defensive attitude, if you will, and it's very hard to take that criticism and that critique. So 1, you have to be willing. I think 2, you have to be a part of a program that's really going to wrap around you and work with you, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about CARE. And then the professional development that comes with it, trainings that we are a part of. I went to New Orleans with a training that they encouraged me to go to with Beyond Diversity, and it was fantastic, and I came back just supercharged. And then when I talked about it and we were allowed to bring 2 more people on, they were, the people were like, oh my gosh, I want to be a part of that, because it exudes out of you when you have the professional development that is wonderful. And I mean, there are plenty of stories we can give you about professional development that is not wonderful. So when you're a part of a program that is so dedicated and so excited about it, it's easy to also become excited. And then because the group is so small to start, you feel very comfortable and willing to accept the critique. And it's a very vulnerable situation to be in. But because it's so small and because everybody is with you wanting to be there, it just seems like the place to be, and you're willing to accept it because you want to and you know it's important, rather than being forced into it. Did that answer your question?
You did.
Okay.
And maybe when the other folks answer the second part of that question, they can talk about, we don't always have the luxury to say, well, if you want to connect with all your kids, go ahead. And if you don't, well, you're just not ready. Like, we have to move our system to connect with all kids.
Right.
So how do we move that?
That actually is a part of our presentation where we're going to talk about the protocols that we use around the care work. So we'll just tuck that in there. Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here this evening maybe not this late, but it is wonderful to be here this evening
We're hanging in there.
to talk about something that has brought some, as Misty was talking about, some wonderful progress to our schools. Let's take a look. The first slide you see is an overall structure for the courageous conversations about race that is a part of each of our schools. The equity team forms the foundation for both the care and the PASS work. The equity team, all of the schools now have equity teams, and that's where the professional development around deepening their racial consciousness occurs. The care team, and care is the classroom part of this work. And so there's the professional growth part and the personal growth part, but then the next step moves it into the classroom, which is what care does. And then the final of those three parts of the courageous conversations about race has to do with PASS, which is partnerships for academically successful students, and that's the parent piece of it.
So I'd like to talk a little bit more about the care process and what it's about. So care is a piece of our equity transformation process that we have here at the district. So if you'll see the words up there in bold, they really encompass the cycle of inquiry, and that's a collaborative, classroom level action. Equity in action. So first off, we have discover. And what discovering looks like is teachers ask themselves, how am I connecting to my students of color? Through what I teach and how I teach. Part of that process is asking teachers to identify a focal student of color and really getting to know that student. And we call that above and below the line information. So above the line information would be information that you would get from Synergy, from the Student Information System, from a CUME file. Below the line information would be that information that you might receive from talking to the student, talking from family members, getting to know who that student is, where they come from, what their culture looks like, their language, etc. So that's really important to get, important piece of getting to know who your student is. Then we look at documenting, developing, and delivering. And what this looks like is really what Misty talked about, and that is planning and delivering a lesson with your focal student in mind. The last piece is disseminating. And disseminating is about the all-important observation process, and I'm going to talk more about that later, where teachers receive feedback, and then they consider and integrate that feedback into the next lesson that they'll teach with their focal student in mind, and then the cycle begins again. Okay, now I'd like to talk about the 4 R's, which is a cornerstone of the care work. So the first R, rigor. And rigor is really having high expectations for all of your students. Realness. Realness is about knowing who you are, what your culture is, and knowing about your culture and your race. And when I say knowing who you are as a teacher, and knowing who you are and what you bring to the classroom in terms of your culture and race. It's important that teachers bring their real selves to the classroom in order for the classroom to be welcoming and comfortable for students of color to bring their real selves. Relevance, asking yourself, is the content of what I'm teaching and the style of my instruction meaningful and engaging for my students of color? So I'll give you an example. a traditional classroom where students are sitting quietly, everyone's well behaved, and they're raising their hands when they have a question. That works for some of our students. For some of our students, a model where there may be some call and response, where there are opportunities for shout outs, that can also be an engaged, well-behaved classroom. So it's really looking at, is the content and how I'm teaching meeting the needs of my students, all of my students. And then we look at relationship. And relationship is about authentic connections between teachers and students. So knowing what our students need, and relationships look different for different students. It may be a hello when a student walks into your classroom. It may be intentionally checking in with a student once they've sat down at their desk, just checking in. How's your morning been? Do you have the supplies that you need? You ready to go? So it's all about knowing what that student needs and meeting them where they're at.
So what does care look like in our schools currently? Well, as you can see, we have, our schools are in a variety of places. In 2015-16, we will have 35 schools that will implement care school-wide. And then in the year 2016-17, all our schools will implement or be in the process of implementing care school-wide. And the staggering occurs because our schools entered the Courageous Conversations About Race in a staggered manner, and so that's why that is happening. One of the most important parts of the care work, of course, is the teacher, and the principal's selection of teachers for beginning the care work in their school is integral to its success. Principals select teacher leaders who are open to learning about culturally relevant teaching. They select teachers who are reflective practitioners, and they also select teachers that are a cross-section of the teachers in their building. There are three major themes in the care work. The first theme, or purpose for the seminar work that our teachers do, is to build cultural and racial proficiency. A second theme in our professional development for our care teachers is how to use action research to improve their instructional practice. And the third theme that is in our care seminar professional development work is that it focuses on culturally relevant and responsive instruction.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the professional development model. So teachers will receive, care teachers will receive training from developed and facilitated by our team of 6 equity TOSAs, or teachers on special assignment. So what the care team looks like is there are 2 to 4 teachers and a building administrator, with the goal of that care team bringing the care work school-wide. I also want to emphasize the importance of administrator involvement, and having been a care teacher myself, I know how important it is to have the support of my administrator. I can be enthusiastic, I can engage my students of color, and it will be meaningful to my work and to my students' work. With administrator support, that's really meaningful in terms of bringing the work school-wide. So what we have is we have 4 seminar modules over 2 years, and the seminars are day-long seminars. And after we have our first seminar, then we'll do a half-day visit, or we'll conduct a half-day visit with the care team. And during that half-day visit, the TOSAs and the care teams will discuss what was discussed during the seminar for clarification and for anchoring their learning. Then they will have a meeting where they will have site observations and classroom observations. And I'll talk about more about that in the next slide. So now we're looking at the protocol for the care observation. And this is so important to the process because, as Misty said earlier, it's about being vulnerable, it's about examining your practice, and it's about going deeper in the racial equity work and in your practice. So the first thing we do is we have pre-observation, and the pre-observation, during that time, we ground ourselves using the protocols and really talk about how we are going to be fully present. As we know, it's not always easy as a teacher to be fully present because you have 50 things going on at once. So this is a really important step in order for teachers to feel present and ready to go with the observation process. Then the teachers will share information about their focal students and what they would like, what questions they have about their lesson, or what engagement looks like for their focal student, and any wonderings that they have. At that point, the team then visits each teacher's classroom who's going to be observed for 20 minutes. So that teacher teaches a lesson, their peers observe, and during that time they take notes, thinking about what they're seeing and what it makes them wonder. And they spend about 20 minutes in each classroom. Then we have the all-important post-observation debrief. Once again, grounding is so important, and really honoring the fact that teachers are in a place, and they need to be in a place of disequilibrium, and what that looks like is that teachers are thinking about, reflecting on, and questioning their instructional practices. During that time, the teacher who's been observed will talk about how the lesson went regarding their focal student. After they've talked about the lesson, then the teachers who are observing will share their feedback in terms of what they saw and what it made them wonder. And this is the time when they have the opportunity to affirm and challenge. And then after that, there's a process of dialogue, and that is the teacher who has been observed really shares what resonated most with them from the feedback that they received.
Sorry. And the final slide shows our team, the TOSA team, and the three names that have an asterisk behind them are new members to our team. And the addition of the staff for this year made it possible for us to move the care work district-wide. And so that was a huge move forward for both the work in the district as well as for our team. And then, of course, Regina also was new to our team, and her focus now is totally on the care work, so that I can do both. I can be a part of that, but I can also work with our principals in their buildings. So that ends our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that deep dive into this piece, as well as for the previous overall update. So, board members, questions or comments either about the care piece or the overall equity implementation update? We'll look at this direction.
I just had have a couple of questions. First of all, I guess is it Misty? Is that right? Whoops! Don't escape.
You're the star.
Oh, you should have left when you had the chance. It's always best to hear from the teachers. So, tell me about the focus student. How do you pick that focus student, and is it just one student you have, or and do you ask the student if you can use them as a focus, or just how does that all work?
So generally, no, I do not ask them. They love to be the focal student because they're the focal, focus of all attention.
So they know they're the focal student.
Sometimes, generally, last year, it was our first year at CARE, or being a member of CARE, and so I did not tell my focal students that they were focal students. I had a lot of conversations with them, but they didn't really. No, I just let that go. But this year I have said, hey, you're my focal student, and of course the world revolves around them at 15, so they love that. But the way I pick them is generally they're students of color, and they're students that I feel need some more attention, or I feel I'm not serving them well. And so if I'm not serving them well, something is missing, and so I need to figure out what I need to do to better serve them.
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily, oh, I have this behavior child. It's I'm not connecting well with this student, or I'm not doing everything that I need to do to help them succeed. And so that's those 1 or 2 students are going to be my focal students.
And so you've been in this program for 2 years, correct? So what's the difference you're seeing, not only in yourself, you kind of talked a little bit about that, but what kind of a difference is it making in your classroom with your students?
The difference is phenomenal. It's hard for me to even describe how impactful it's been, because it's so subtle, yet so huge. And so for me, I feel like because I'm specifically focusing on certain students and creating lessons as much as I can around them, they don't even realize that they're engaging more, but then they walk out and like today, for instance, one of my students, who's my focal student, walked out, and he was saying as he walked out, man, that was a lesson just for me. And I was like, yes, it was. Yes, it was. But he doesn't, he didn't necessarily know that I'm thinking at night, like, how can I get him to, to be engaged? What does he need? So it's little things like that they just walk out and man, I totally had you all day today, or for that 94 minutes of time.
Right.
And that was wonderful. And the academic, it shows in their assessments as well. So when I have them in class and I'm doing what I need to do for them, it shows up when I give them any sort of assessment.
Great.
And I think what's most important is that it just doesn't show up for my students, for my focal students. It shows up across the board, because those little things that I'm doing for, those 2 students are what 18 other students need as well. I'm just highlighting those 2 that I'm focusing on.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No.
Director Morton.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation and everything. I think the information that we were provided is pretty comprehensive. I think the equity work across the district is probably some of the, if not the most important work that we can be doing right now, particularly given, again, the indicators like graduation rates, achievement gaps, things like that we see that continue to be in need of work. I think the care in schools is also really important. I think what's also important in addition to that is improving our process and increasing our hiring for teachers of color. We have the Minority Teacher Act, which although the legislature, when passing this 10 plus years ago, didn't give it any teeth, actually created some targets that I think our district needs to be moving towards. At the very least, we should have a teacher workforce and an administrative workforce that reflects the students in our classrooms. So I know that's not necessarily all of your jobs, but it is certainly all of our responsibility in finding and bringing successful teachers of color and administrators of color into our district. So a couple of just real quick things on top of that. One is the selection criteria, and the first 3 items, I can't imagine a teacher of quality that wouldn't fit any of these. So, and to reiterate, it's open to an interest in equity, anti-racism work in the school, open to learning how to use culturally relevant teaching practices to improve achievement of students of color, and willing to share what they have learned with their colleagues. So I'm interested, because I'm certain once these are asked, every teacher in our building is raising their hand saying, I fit this and I want to be a part of this. How do we choose them across schools specifically? Or are there other, I would imagine there are other criteria. I would hope there are.
Actually, there are other criteria, but we just summarized it to these main
Sure.
4.
Okay.
So,
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
if you had other, I'd be willing to hear it if you.
if I had other criteria.
Criteria, right.
For example, teachers who have who have shown some success with students of color might be a teacher that would be interested in being a part of the care team.
Okay.
And the care team is just the very beginning of the work, and that starts with the 2 to 4 teachers that come to the initial training. But then those teachers, the following year, then work with other teachers at their grade level in their school to broaden that scope. So while they may start out with just the 2, they very quickly move out of that 2, and that 2 becomes 4 or 6 or 10.
Okay. So you laid out some of the professional development model, the seminars. I'm curious about who are the content experts in these seminars, who's presenting them?
The content experts would be our 6 equity care TOSAs.
Okay. Okay.
They develop and facilitate. So they have complete ownership, and they are the experts.
Okay.
And they are the peers
Okay.
of our teachers. I think that's
And
very important to note.
So and I guess experts based on what criteria? Because I can look at
One of them was our national award winner.
I can look at our graduation rates, particularly across our communities of color, and say no one should be calling themselves an expert.
But I think part of what it is, man, is also that you have within the context of CARES and around courageous conversation, that expertise doesn't preclude the availability to bring other expertise into our schools. This is a part of that strategy, but it's not the whole of the strategy. Who's in the school, who supports it, working our community partners about doing curriculum that brings it into the classroom. So it is multifaceted. So this is one slice of it, because until and unless we close gaps all across this country, I submit no one's really an expert. I agree with you. But how do you keep moving, how you look at it and bring all the resources that we can is really how we believe we ultimately close the gap.
I appreciate that.
And when I used the word expert, I meant expert about the care process.
And I think I used the word expert as well.
Yeah, as when they're disseminating the information about care and training teachers about care.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. And I think I ask these questions not because I feel like this is something that should not be happening, but I think we need to continue to question our assumptions about the quality of education that we're providing.
Absolutely.
Not for any other reason than, again, when we see the evidence demonstrates something very different than maybe what we think is happening. So, and I think that continuous asking those questions is a part of that continuous improvement. So I appreciate those questions continuing to be asked.
I do want to add one thing. You brought up the issue of the Minority Teachers Act, and not to preempt when we come back to talk about affirmative action and those kind of things, but as we look preliminarily at our data, the state has set a 10% goal for 2015. We have exceeded that goal. So just to give you a preemption that we've exceeded it, nowhere close to where we're going to be. As you know, HR and all of us are working very hard to identify, recruit, grow our workforce, but we are on a trajectory that is relatively encouraging at this moment.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, and hopefully we're setting an expectation on this board that's the trajectory that we want.
Other folks? Director Buell.
So my understanding is what we're trying to do is to teach our teachers to do a better job with all their children, regardless of their backgrounds. Is that a summary of what we're trying to do here? The care, that's what specifically that we're trying to do, which is great, it's nice we're getting to that. I really appreciate it. There's a couple other things that, and it has not really to do with this, it has to do with the whole equity program, because I think it's great that we're teaching our teachers how to deal with children in their class or how to teach better with all their children. But we're awful short in some areas. It seems to me that we shouldn't be short in reading teachers to teach children to read, librarians to get them going, counselors to work with them. I would think that should be part of our equity plan, and I don't see it in these equity plan things at all. I don't see that. And for me, that's a major part of our equity plan. I just like to make that, should be teaching children to read. We're really talking about equitable education to a huge degree for all children, regardless of where they come from or where they come from, period. They're different backgrounds or approaches or whatever that is, whatever that represents. What we're trying to do is get an educational equity, and for us to do that, I think we've got to start sticking some resources into the classrooms, some places that we're not, and one is teaching everybody to read. The second thing is, I have not seen yet, and I haven't been investigating what we're really doing around the curriculum, particularly in the lower grades. So we have culturally relevant curriculum, particularly in history and those and similar type subjects, and I haven't seen that. I think if we're going to really say, okay, we're doing an equity program, those are two things that we really need to look at and begin work on. Both those things, in my opinion. The third question I had is more of a personal one. People who know me would know. There's a lot of stuff out there about how racist the Common Core is, that it's really not a system that is without bias. Are we looking at that and saying, I wonder how we can, if we're going to do all this Common Core stuff, are we going to look at the bias? Have we looked at that? I mean, is anybody in our district saying, oh, maybe this is, I mean, what is it? How can we make adjustments so we don't get caught up in those particular problems concerning the SBAC testing, the Common Core? There's a lot of, I mean, there's two sides to that issue. I know there's two sides to it because I read about it all the time. One side says, oh no, this is great. The other side says, no, this is horribly inequitable and creates this horrible bias around it. And we're coming down on the side that says, no, this is going to be good. Otherwise, we might not be doing it without the balancing of it, which we're not doing. It doesn't appear to me that we're not balancing it. Well, I think if we're going to really talk about equity too, we may want to look at what we're now pushing out for every student in our entire school system and make sure that that doesn't have these built-in biases, that we're not making things worse by doing that, and we need to be guarding against that. You don't have to answer that. I just wanted to make those statements because I think they really ring true to me. So there you go.
Any questions? Dr. Blau.
I'm going to come back. Misty, I just want to say thank you for being here. I know that you're going to be up early tomorrow and you're going to have kids, and I just want to say thank you for being willing to show that learning is lifelong, for being one of those people that understands that the results that are happening in the classroom are a direct result of the adult in front of the classroom, not a fault of the students that show up in the classroom. So thank you for that. And I want to say thank you to the equity team, the folks that are doing the work. Cynthia, I'm going to call a special shout out to you. I have consistently heard throughout the district how much people have felt supported by you, and how much they really appreciate your working with them to deal with this. I'm going to return back to my original question about what are the things when we have teachers, principals who are not ready to do this work. How do we help them find a different place? How do we provide them the support? Or what tools do we have to say, thank you, but your services are no longer needed? Because as Director Morton points out, we're moving in the right direction, but these are unacceptable outcomes. And we don't have the time to say, well, if you want, that'd be great.
Let me do this again because often in my role, I have to bring us back to a point that part of my office's job is to coordinate, work with, discuss, provide professional development to the district. A lot of the specific issues around curriculum and management of personnel and teachers are not a part of our plan, our domain, which is why when Janine said part of what you will see and hear will come to you from other presentations. We will highlight that, we will show it to you, but a lot of that comes in those presentations. Now, we may have an opinion, but part of that is to share with the superintendent and the senior team about what we think and how we see that happening. Yes, they are critically important, but unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you sit on it, that is not part of our primary job. So I just offer that as a caveat.
I appreciate that, and I wasn't asking you necessarily or any one of you specifically, but just to drive the point home that unless we have levers, and with Assistant Superintendent Lopez in the room, I just want to highlight that unless we have levers to make that happen, this is a lot of feel-good talk.
Yes, absolutely. You're correct.
Actually, if I could just offer a couple of things. One of the very important parts of our work is to work very closely with, and this is part of my job, is to work very closely with Antonio and with the senior directors to make sure that they are very clear on what their schools and what the principals in their schools are doing, and also that we're there to support both the principal and the senior directors. So I work very closely with them. So that's one of the ways that we can have some influence or some sway in that whole process of performance, to be sure that our principals are very clear on what support is there for them and what is expected of them as far as being equity leaders in their school. And then for the senior directors to know that our office is there to support the schools and the administrators and the teachers in any way that we can.
Thank you. One last comment?
I doubt very much if we have teachers out there or principals even who are not ready for this work. I think the way some of the mistakes we made along created some of the problem that we underwent, and it got misaligned with some other idea of what was causing that, but that's here nor there. This program goes out and says to teachers, look, here's some things we can use to help you with all the children in your classroom. I don't think you'll have anywhere near the back push that you had for a lot of the other work and the way that we went about it. And I think one of the problems that we have is by pointing those fingers and saying, we have these people that are not ready for this work and we should be firing them. That's not the approach that I think makes sense. The approach that makes sense is, we know you're all ready for this work, and we're going to bring you together, and we're going to give you this work, and it's going to be so good you're going to embrace it. And I think there's a lot of difference between how you approach that, and I think one of the problems that we had on our early approach to some of this work was that we were pointing the fingers. You are the bad guy, you are the person, and all that finger pointing, and a lot of people responded negatively, who taught in our buildings for years and years and years, responded negatively to that. I don't think it was necessarily around that they're not ready for equity work. I think they're plenty ready for it. It was kind of a little bit how we went about it, and it sounds to me like the way that we're going about it now makes a lot of sense. Here's some things you can use in your classroom, because that's what we're really about, is teaching children. And so I'm real glad to see that this is the direction that we're going.
So great. On that note of unanimity and agreement that we're headed in the right direction, just thank you so much. Thank you so much, Misty, for being here at this late hour. Really, really, really valuable to have your direct voice from the classroom. So thank you so much. Thanks to all the staff.
Thank you.
Even though we didn't go through cell by cell, I know we all reviewed this cell by cell. It's available to the public to look at. Appreciate all the work of the staff and just that feeling of cumulative momentum and as the work gains strength and throughout the district, so in every part of the district. So thank you so much for all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so at this late hour, the board will now consider a very small business agenda. Ms. Houston, are there any changes to the business agenda?
There are not.
All right, do I have a motion and a second to adopt the business agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Director Knowles moves very quickly, and Director Blau quickly seconds the adoption of the business agenda. Is there any public comment?
No.
There is none. Any board discussion? No. Okay, the board will now vote on the business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any abstentions? Okay, the business agenda is approved by a vote of 5-0 with student representative Jaswal voting
Yes.
yes. All right. Before I adjourn, just want to remind parents out there, if you haven't already done so, either check your email to take the successful school survey, or if you prefer to do it by paper, you can go check at your school, and folks there will help you fill out that survey. So do please fill it out. We are looking for a very high completion rate at every single school. So thank you for taking the successful school survey. The next meeting of the board will be held on Tuesday, February 10th, and we are adjourned.